My name is Nora, 33 years old, and I am a forensic accountant who specializes in tracking hidden corporate money. He handed me divorce papers at the biggest charity gala of the year, smiling as he told me I was walking away with absolutely nothing. I did not scream and I did not cry. I just signed the papers, smiled back, and walked out. He thought he had just ruined my life. He had no idea that by the end of the month he would be begging me to save him from federal prison, and I would legally own every single thing he thought was his. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic partner who thought they held all the power. I spent my days unearthing offshore accounts and proving financial fraud. I knew exactly how wealthy people lied. But I never expected the biggest liar to be the man I shared a home with. The crystal chandeliers of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel cast a golden glow over the annual real estate charity gala. The room was packed with the most elite developers in New York City. They sipped expensive champagne and discussed millions of dollars in casual conversation. I stood near the ice sculpture wearing a simple black evening gown I had bought off the rack. I was completely invisible, which was exactly how my husband Bradley preferred me to be at these high society events. Bradley is 35 years old and the charismatic chief executive officer of his family property development firm. He was standing across the room, but he was not alone. He was standing far too close to a stunning 20-something interior designer named Elise. His hand rested comfortably on the small of her back. I set my glass down and walked toward them. I simply wanted to get the keys to our car so I could go home. But as I approached, the low murmur of conversation around them ceased. Bradley saw me coming. Instead of stepping away from Elise, his grip on her waist tightened. He reached into his tailored tuxedo jacket, his jaw set in a hard, arrogant line. "Nora," Bradley said loudly. Too loudly. The wealthy investors standing nearby stopped talking and turned to look at us. Perfect timing. This saves me the trouble of having my assistant courier this to your cubicle on Monday. He pulled a thick manila envelope from his jacket and slapped it against my chest. I instinctively caught it before it hit the floor. The bold black letters stamped across the top of the document were visible to everyone. Petition for dissolution of marriage. A heavy silence fell over our corner of the ballroom. He was not just divorcing me. He was doing it right here in the middle of a $500 a plate dinner, surrounded by the most powerful business owners in the city. Sign it. Bradley commanded, his voice dripping with condescension. He took a leisurely sip of his bourbon. I am done pretending this marriage works. Elise and I are moving forward with the new downtown waterfront project. We need a united front. You do not fit the brand anymore, Nora. You never really did. I looked at Elise. She offered me a sympathetic pout that was entirely fake. I am sorry, Nora, she murmured. Bradley needs a partner who understands his grand vision, not someone who crunches numbers in a basement all day. I am a forensic accountant, I said, my voice eerily calm despite the adrenaline spiking in my veins. I do not crunch numbers. I find the ones people like him try to hide. Bradley scoffed, rolling his eyes as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. You are just an oversized bookkeeper. Now be a good girl and sign the papers. My lawyer drafted them this afternoon. I looked down at the document. You want me to sign divorce papers right here, next to the caviar bar? Why wait? A deep, smooth voice interjected from behind me. It was DeAndre, my 34-year-old brother-in-law. DeAndre was an African-American corporate powerhouse, a senior partner at one of Manhattan's most ruthless law firms, and the husband of Bradley's younger sister. DeAndre was the designated fixer for the family. Whenever Bradley stepped out of line, DeAndre used his legal brilliance to bury the evidence. He stepped into my peripheral vision, impeccably dressed, his posture radiating dominance. He pulled a sleek silver pen from his pocket and clicked it. He held it out to me, his dark eyes fixed on mine with predatory calculation. He was ready to finish the humiliation Bradley had started. Do not make this difficult, Nora, DeAndre said smoothly, his tone sounding more like a judge handing down a sentence than a family member talking to his sister-in-law. I drafted those papers myself. I made sure they are absolutely bulletproof. Clause 3 clearly activates the prenuptial agreement you signed 5 years ago. You leave with your personal belongings, your car, and whatever remains in your individual checking account. You have absolutely zero claim to the family business, the penthouse, or the new waterfront development project that is about to break ground. I stared at the silver pen in his hand. The expensive metal caught the light from the crystal chandeliers hanging directly above us. DeAndre was a master of legal intimidation. In the courtroom, he destroyed opposing counsel with a terrifying, calculated calm. He was using that exact same tactic on me right now, banking on the fact that the sudden public humiliation would force me into a quick, panicked submission. He took half a step closer, deliberately invading my personal space. His dark eyes locked onto mine with intense focus. If you refuse to sign right now, I will file an emergency motion on Monday morning. I will drag you through the mud. I will tie you up in a hostile discovery process for the next 3 years. You do not have the personal capital to afford a litigator who can even sit at the same table as me. You will spend every dollar you earn paying a discount attorney just to tread water while I bankrupt you with endless aggressive legal motions. I felt the heavy weight of the room pressing down on me. The wealthy guests surrounding us were pretending to look away, but I knew they were hanging on every single word. Bradley was smirking, clearly enjoying the entire show. He always loved letting DeAndre do his dirty work. DeAndre lowered his voice, delivering the final blow. I know exactly how your industry works, Nora. Forensic accountants rely on pristine reputations and absolute trust. What do you think happens when I subpoena your firm? What happens when I depose your managing partners? When I leak to your high-net-worth clients that you are currently tied up in a brutal, messy financial investigation of your own? Your boss will see you as a massive liability. You will be fired before the end of the month. I will strip clean that measly title of yours until you are auditing small-town grocery stores just to make rent. Bradley stepped forward, wrapping his arm even tighter around Elise. Listen to him, Nora. Be reasonable for once in your life. You got 5 years of absolute luxury you could never afford on a basic corporate accountant salary. You gotta live in a $10 million penthouse and eat at restaurants you could never even walk into without me. I am being incredibly generous here by letting you walk away without destroying your career. Just sign the document and go back to your boring life. Elise took a delicate sip of her champagne and let out a soft, mocking laugh. It really is the best option for everyone, she chimed in. Bradley and I have a major press conference next week. We cannot have a bitter ex-wife causing a scene and ruining the corporate image. They thought they had me perfectly cornered. They thought the prenuptial agreement was an impenetrable wall that protected their massive wealth. DeAndre was a brilliant corporate lawyer, but he had one fatal flaw. He viewed me purely as a math nerd, a woman who simply balanced basic ledgers. He fundamentally misunderstood what a forensic accountant actually does. I do not just count the money. I track exactly where the money is hidden, how it is legally structured, and who holds the ultimate liability. When Bradley forced me to sign that prenuptial agreement 5 years ago, he ensured I would never touch his family money. But he had gotten greedy. Over the last 3 years, to avoid massive federal tax penalties on his real estate deals, Bradley had secretly restructured his assets. He had parked the ownership of the new downtown waterfront project into a private entity to shield it from the Internal Revenue Service. And because he thought I was just a naive, obedient wife, he used my clean background to set up that entity. He thought the prenuptial agreement protected him. He did not realize that by putting the corporate structure in my name, he had legally bypassed the prenuptial agreement entirely. He had essentially handed me the keys to his entire empire on a silver platter, all while committing federal tax fraud. I looked at the divorce petition. I looked at Bradley's smug face, Elise's fake sympathy, and DeAndre's predatory glare. They wanted me to feel small. They wanted me to feel utterly defeated and financially ruined. I reached out and took the silver pen from DeAndre. His lips curved into a triumphant smile, fully convinced he had broken me in record time. I did not say a single word. I just clicked the pen, the sharp metallic sound cutting through the quiet whispers of the ballroom crowd. The heavy paper of the petition felt rough beneath my fingers as I prepared to sign. Before the tip of the pen could even touch the thick paper, a sharp, familiar voice cut through the tension. "Well, it is about time." I paused and looked up. Pushing through the small crowd of whispering guests was my mother-in-law, Sylvia. She was draped in heavy diamond necklaces that cost more than my college education, projecting the image of old money, despite the fact that her father had been a simple car salesman. Right behind her was Gemma Bradley, 30-year-old sister and DeAndre wife. Gemma had never worked a single day in her life. She survived entirely on her father trust fund and her husband massive corporate law salary. They had clearly been waiting in the wings for this exact moment, eager to watch my public execution. Sylvia looked me up and down, her lip curling in absolute disgust as she took in my simple black dress. "I told you 5 years ago this marriage was a colossal mistake, Bradley," she announced loudly, making sure the surrounding investors could hear every single word. "She is a blue-collar girl from Queens. She never understood how to operate in our world. Look at her standing there like a deer in the headlights. You have wasted enough time on this charity case. It is time to upgrade to a woman who actually understands our family values." She smiled warmly at Elise, who beamed back as if she had just won a massive prize. Gemma stepped forward, crossing her arms over her expensive silk gown. "Honestly, Nora, you should be on your knees thanking my brother right now," she sneered. "He gave you 5 years of pure luxury. You got to live in a $10 million penthouse and pretend you were one of us. Just take your cheap luggage and go back to whatever cramped apartment you came from. And DeAndre, honey, make sure she does not try to take the imported Italian espresso machine from the kitchen when she packs. I bought them that for their anniversary, and she certainly cannot afford the beans for it anyway." DeAndre did not even look at his wife. He kept his predatory gaze locked entirely on me. "The espresso machine is perfectly safe, Gemma," he replied in his smooth courtroom voice. "Everything is safe. The airtight prenuptial agreement guarantees that she leaves with nothing but the clothes on her back. Isn't that right, Nora?" I looked at the four of them standing in a tight half-circle around me. Bradley, arrogant and puffed up with fake power. Elise, the naive mistress who thought she had just won the lottery. DeAndre, the ruthless fixer who thought his legal paperwork was bulletproof. And Sylvia and Gemma, the vicious women who had spent half a decade making sure I knew I was beneath them. They wanted me to cry. They wanted me to beg for a settlement. They wanted a dramatic, hysterical reaction so they could prove to all the wealthy guests in the room that I was unstable and unworthy of their elite circle. Instead, I felt a deep, profound sense of peace wash over me. I looked down at the divorce petition resting against my hand. I knew exactly what they did not know. I knew about the secret corporate shell companies. I knew about the Delaware tax loopholes Bradley had exploited over the last 3 years. Because I was a forensic accountant with a flawless professional record, he thought my name would be the perfect shield against federal auditors. He foolishly believed the prenuptial agreement overrode the federal tax code. I knew that the multi-million-dollar waterfront project they were all bragging about tonight was legally registered under a private trust that only I controlled. They thought they were throwing me out into the street. In reality, they were legally detaching themselves from the only person who could save them from the Internal Revenue Service and total financial ruin. I placed the heavy silver pen against the signature line. My hand did not shake. My breathing was perfectly steady. I pressed down and signed my name in clear, bold letters. I flipped to the second page and signed again. Then the third. When I was finished, I neatly aligned the edges of the petition and held it out to DeAndre. He took the papers, a smug smile spreading across his face. "A smart decision," he said quietly. I handed him back his expensive pen. Then I turned my attention to Bradley. He was already leaning in to kiss Elise, celebrating his ultimate victory. "I am leaving the keys to the SUV with the valet," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through his celebration. "I will have my things out of the penthouse by tomorrow morning. Bradley smirked, looking me up and down one last time. Good. Make sure you leave the parking pass on the kitchen counter. You will not be needing it where you are going. I did not argue. I just smiled, a genuine, chilling smile that made his smug expression falter for a fraction of a second. Watch me walk away, Bradley, I said softly, making sure only the four of them could hear me. You will be begging soon. I turned my back on my husband, my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, and the ruthless lawyer who thought he had outsmarted me. I walked away without looking back. The crisp night air of Manhattan hit my face as I walked through the revolving glass doors of the Waldorf Astoria. The valet rushed forward holding the keys to the luxury SUV Bradley and I had arrived in. I shook my head, instructed him to leave the keys at the front desk for my husband, and stepped off the curb. A sleek black Uber I had ordered from the cloakroom pulled up exactly on time. I slid into the quiet leather interior and gave the driver a polite nod. As the car merged into the heavy city traffic, leaving the glowing facade of the hotel behind, the silence wrapped around me like a protective shield. There were no tears. My heart rate, which should have been racing after such a massive public confrontation, was completely steady. 5 years of emotional manipulation had drained any capacity I had left for crying over Bradley. I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. The soft blue light of the screen illuminated the dark back seat of the car. I connected to the secure mobile hotspot and opened my encrypted financial servers. It was time to go to work. Bradley thought the prenuptial agreement was his ultimate weapon. He relied heavily on DeAndre to write contracts that legally suffocated people. But DeAndre was a corporate lawyer who dealt in broad corporate strokes. I was a forensic accountant. I dealt in the microscopic details where the real money was actually buried. 3 years ago, when Bradley wanted to dodge massive federal taxes on his new downtown waterfront project, he needed a clean, untraceable shell company. He begged me to act as the primary director of a blind trust. He told me it was just a temporary measure to protect the family business. He signed a stack of complex formation documents without ever reading the fine print. He should have read the fine print, because I was the one who drafted it. I opened the master file for the Ironclad Trust. The trust legally held the deed to the 50 acres of prime waterfront real estate, along with the $40 million in liquid capital, meant for the initial construction phase. Bradley treated that money like his personal piggy bank, confident that because my clean professional name was on the trust, he was completely insulated from any federal tax audits. He never realized that I had structured the trust according to strict Delaware corporate law. I was not just a figurehead. I was the sole legal beneficiary and the absolute owner. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I drafted a highly confidential email to the primary asset managers at the Trust Administration Bank. The subject line was simple but devastating. Activating Clause 4B, immediate execution required. Clause 4B was a fail-safe provision I had quietly embedded deep within the operating agreement of the Ironclad Trust. It explicitly stated that in the event of a significant change in my marital status or any external legal threat against my personal assets, the trust would enter an absolute lockdown. It immediately revoked all secondary financial access. It locked the bank accounts. It froze the land deed, making it impossible to sell, transfer, or borrow against without my direct physical signature. By sending this single email, I was completely cutting Bradley and his development firm off from their own flagship project. The money they needed to pay their contractors, their investors, and their architects was now legally untouchable. I hit send. Less than a minute later, an automated confirmation popped up on my screen. The freeze was active. The lock was absolute. My phone vibrated on the seat next to me. It was an email from DeAndre. The subject line read, "Final executed documents." Inside was a scanned copy of the divorce petition I had just signed, along with a cold, formal message. You have until noon tomorrow to remove your personal items from the penthouse. Building security has been notified to escort you out if you delay. Do not attempt to contact Bradley or the family. I swiped the email away. A moment later, a social media notification popped up on my screen. Elise had just posted a photo. It was a picture of her and Bradley clinking crystal champagne glasses at the charity gala with DeAndre and Gemma smiling triumphantly in the background. The caption read, "Cheers to new beginnings and building our empire together." They were celebrating. They were drinking expensive champagne, utterly convinced they had just executed the perfect legal assassination. They thought they had discarded me like trash while keeping all their precious wealth intact. I closed my laptop and leaned my head back against the cool leather seat, a genuine smile spreading across my face. They could enjoy their champagne tonight. They could post all the victorious photos they wanted. Because on Monday morning, when Bradley tried to access the corporate funds to break ground on his massive new empire, he was going to find out that he owned absolutely nothing. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the $10 million penthouse, casting long shadows across the imported hardwood floors. I had been awake since dawn. I did not bother making the custom king-sized bed. I simply pulled my old scuffed suitcase from the back of the walk-in closet and began to pack. I did not touch the designer dresses Bradley had bought me for corporate events. I left the expensive handbags on their display shelves. I only packed the plain clothes I had purchased with my own salary, my personal documents, and most importantly, my encrypted work laptop. That laptop was the only thing in this massive apartment that truly mattered. DeAndre had explicitly stated in his email that I had until noon to vacate the premises. But I knew Bradley too well. He was a man who craved absolute control, and he would never pass up an opportunity to exert his dominance. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, 4 hours before the legal deadline, the private elevator chimed. The heavy mahogany double doors swung open without a knock. Bradley strode into the foyer, flanked by two massive building security guards in dark suits. Right behind the guards was Elise. She was holding a digital tablet and a cup of artisan coffee, looking around the penthouse as if she were touring a museum. Plans changed. Nora Bradley announced, his voice echoing in the massive living room. "I am not waiting until noon. Elise has contractors coming in at 10 to rip out this awful modern art decor you insisted on. You have exactly 30 minutes to get your things and get out." I calmly zipped up my single suitcase and wheeled it out of the bedroom. "I am already packed," I replied, my voice completely devoid of the panic he was so desperately hoping to provoke. Bradley frowned, his eyes darting to my small piece of luggage. He snapped his fingers and pointed at the security guards. "Watch her closely. Make sure she is not trying to sneak out any of the jewelry I bought her, or that Italian espresso machine Gemma was talking about last night. My lawyer was very clear about what she is legally allowed to take." I walked over to the sprawling marble kitchen island. I unclasped the diamond tennis bracelet from my wrist and placed it gently on the cold stone surface. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the velvet box containing my diamond engagement ring and wedding band. I set them right next to the bracelet. "Keep them," I said smoothly. "I do not want anything that was purchased with your money." What I did not say out loud was that I knew exactly how he had paid for those diamonds. As a forensic accountant, I had seen the hidden ledgers. He had bought that jewelry using diverted funds from the corporate pension account. Once the federal authorities started digging into his finances, those diamonds would be seized as evidence of embezzlement anyway. Leaving them here was just saving myself the trouble of handing them over to the authorities later. Elise walked past me, completely ignoring my presence, and tapped her tablet. "Bradley, darling," she cooed, pointing toward the massive windows overlooking the harbor. "We should definitely put a grand piano right there. It will be perfect for hosting the investor parties once the waterfront project breaks ground next month." Bradley wrapped his arm around her waist and kissed her cheek. "Whatever you want, babe. We are going to have more than enough money to furnish this place 10 times over." He turned his attention back to me, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Did you hear that, Nora? That is what real ambition sounds like." While you are busy renting a cramped studio apartment in a bad neighborhood, we will be building a billion-dollar empire. I looked at my husband of 5 years. He looked so incredibly smug, standing in his luxury penthouse, completely oblivious to the financial guillotine hanging directly over his neck. He truly believed he was untouchable. He believed his high-powered lawyer brother-in-law had protected him. He had absolutely no idea that the money he was promising to Elise was currently locked behind an impenetrable trust that only I could open. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase. I placed my platinum electronic keycard on the kitchen counter next to the diamonds. Have a wonderful time redecorating, Elise. And Bradley, enjoy the view while you still have it. Bradley sneered, clearly annoyed by my lack of tears. Take her down the service elevator, he ordered the guards. I do not want her dirtying up the main lobby and causing a scene in front of the other residents. The two large men stepped forward, gesturing toward the back hallway. I did not protest. I wheeled my suitcase past the expensive Italian furniture, past the man who had betrayed me, and stepped into the small metallic service elevator. The heavy doors slid shut, cutting off the sight of Bradley and Elise laughing together in the living room. As the elevator began its descent to the basement garage, I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. The eviction was complete. I was officially out of the penthouse. I was completely removed from the blast radius. Now the ticking time bomb I had set the night before could finally detonate. Later that evening, the family gathered at one of the most exclusive French restaurants in Manhattan. Bradley had reserved the entire private dining room to celebrate what he called his ultimate liberation. The heavy mahogany table was covered with expensive seafood towers, imported caviar, and multiple bottles of vintage champagne. They were treating the evening like a royal coronation. Bradley sat at the head of the table, holding Elise by the hand. He raised his crystal glass, demanding everyone's attention. To new beginnings, he announced, a wide, arrogant smile on his face. To the departure of dead weight, and to the groundbreaking of the downtown waterfront project. By this time next year, our family will officially be the undisputed kings of New York real estate. Sylvia raised her glass immediately. I will drink to that, she said, taking a long sip. I cannot even begin to tell you how relieved I am. I spent 5 years watching that girl walk around our family events in those dreadful department store dresses. She never fit in. Now we finally have someone who understands our status. She smiled warmly at Elise, who blushed and thanked her with practiced fake modesty. Gemma leaned forward, entirely ignoring the emotional sentiment of the toast. Her eyes were wide with naked greed. Never mind the dresses, Mother Gemma interrupted. Let us talk about the actual money. Bradley, you said the waterfront development is going to clear $50 million in pure profit during the first phase alone. Bradley nodded proudly, cutting into a piece of expensive steak. Easily $50 million, and that is after we pay off the initial construction loans. Because of the corporate structure we set up, we are bypassing massive federal taxes. Gemma clapped her hands together like a spoiled child. Perfect, because DeAndre and I were looking at a summer estate in the Hamptons. It has 8 bedrooms, a private dock, and a guest house. It is listed at $12 million. I already told the real estate agent we would be submitting a cash offer by the end of the month. DeAndre shifted in his seat. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit that cost more than most cars. He placed a steadying hand on his wife's arm. Let us not get ahead of ourselves, Gemma. We submit the cash offer after the bank clears the $50 million loan for the commercial groundbreaking. We need to maintain liquidity for the first 2 weeks. But we are getting the house right. Gemma pushed her voice, adopting a whining tone that she always used to get her way. I already promised my friends we would host the summer solstice party there. You cannot expect me to host it at our current place. It is completely outdated. Bradley laughed loudly, waving his fork in the air. Buy the house, Gemma. Buy 2 if you want. Once the Ironclad Trust releases the contractor deposits on Monday morning, the bank will open the floodgates. There will be enough capital flowing through our accounts to buy half of the Hamptons. DeAndre smirked, taking a slow sip of his bourbon. He leaned back, exuding the total confidence of a man who believed he had outsmarted the entire legal system. I have to admit, Bradley having Nora sign those divorce papers yesterday was the perfect finishing touch. The bank required a clean personal profile for the trust director. Now that she is officially separated from your personal assets through the prenuptial agreement, there is absolutely zero risk of her ever claiming a dime of the corporate revenue. I filed the final clearance paperwork with JP Morgan on Friday afternoon. The funds will be ready for transfer on Monday. Elise rested her head on Bradley's shoulder. You have such a brilliant lawyer for a brother-in-law, she cooed softly. And you are so smart for setting it up this way. It is just so wonderful that everything is finally falling into place. We can start hiring the decorators for the new penthouse tomorrow. They sat there in their private velvet-lined room, gorging themselves on expensive food and spending millions of dollars they did not actually have. They were entirely blinded by their own arrogance. Bradley thought he was a real estate visionary. DeAndre thought he was a legal genius. Gemma thought she was entitled to unlimited wealth. Sylvia thought she had successfully protected her high society bloodline. They toasted to their brilliance again and again as the night wore on. They discussed the extravagant cars they would buy, the luxury vacations they would take, and the massive bonuses they would pay themselves. Not a single one of them realized that the ironclad trust, the exact legal entity they were banking their entire luxurious future on, was currently locked down tighter than a federal vault. They believed Monday morning would be the start of their greatest financial victory. They had absolutely no idea that Monday morning would bring the total catastrophic collapse of their entire world. Monday morning arrived with the sharp, relentless energy that only Wall Street could generate. DeAndre sat behind his massive glass desk in his corner office overlooking Central Park. He wore a fresh tailored suit and a confident, arrogant smirk. Today was the day he would finalize the $50 million commercial loan for the downtown waterfront project. The paperwork was immaculate. He had personally overseen every single signature. He poured himself a cup of black coffee from his private carafe, entirely ready to watch the massive sum hit the family corporate accounts. His desk phone buzzed. It was his executive assistant. She informed him that Thomas Mitchell, the senior vice president of commercial lending at JP Morgan, was holding on line 1. DeAndre pressed the speaker button, leaning back in his expensive leather chair. He fully expected Thomas to congratulate him on closing such a massive, lucrative deal. "Good morning, Thomas," DeAndre said, his voice dripping with corporate swagger. "I assume you are calling to confirm the wire transfer has cleared escrow." There was a heavy, uncomfortable pause on the other end of the line. When Thomas finally spoke, his tone was entirely devoid of the usual friendly banter they shared. "DeAndre, we have a massive problem," Thomas said flatly. "The compliance department just flagged the transfer. The $50 million disbursement has been completely halted." DeAndre frowned, sitting up slightly. He placed his coffee cup on the desk. "Halted for what reason?" "My team submitted the final clearance paperwork on Friday afternoon. The divorce decree is fully executed, completely separating my brother-in-law personal liabilities from the corporate structure. You have the clean title. You have the signed prenuptial agreement. There is absolutely nothing missing." "It has nothing to do with the prenuptial agreement," Thomas replied, his voice tense. "It is the ironclad trust itself. We received an automated, legally binding directive over the weekend. The trust has been placed under a total administrative freeze." DeAndre let out a short, dismissive laugh. "That is impossible, Thomas. I drafted the formation documents for that trust myself. Bradley is the primary beneficiary of the development project. The trust cannot be frozen without a direct court order or a vote from the board of directors. Someone in your compliance department is misreading the paperwork. Unfreeze the account and wire the money before I have to call your managing director and complain about your incompetence. I am looking directly at the master file right now." DeAndre Thomas shot back, his patience clearly thinning. "I am not misreading anything. The freeze was initiated by the sole legal director of the trust, a woman named Nora." DeAndre felt a sudden, sharp coldness wash over his chest. He stared at the speakerphone, his mind racing. Nora? That was impossible. She was just a figurehead. She was an oversized bookkeeper they had used for a clean tax profile. Nora has no authority to freeze corporate assets. DeAndre snapped, his voice rising in anger. She just signed a petition for dissolution of marriage. She is entirely removed from the family business. Ignore whatever automated email she sent and release the funds immediately. I cannot do that, Thomas said firmly. According to Clause 4B of the Trust Operating Agreement, the director has absolute unilateral authority to execute a total asset lockdown in the event of a marital status change. It is a brilliant piece of legal maneuvering. She did not just freeze the bank accounts, DeAndre. She froze the deed to the 50 acres of waterfront property. The bank cannot legally use the land as collateral because Bradley no longer has clear access to it. We cannot lend you $50 million against a property you technically do not control. DeAndre grabbed his computer mouse, frantically opening his secure legal database. He pulled up the original document of the Ironclad Trust. He scrolled past the standard boilerplate language, his eyes scanning the dense legal text he had foolishly allowed Nora to format 3 years ago. He found page 47. There it was. Clause 4B. Buried deep within the operational bylaws was an ironclad provision granting Nora absolute unquestionable sovereignty over the entire trust. A bead of sweat formed on his forehead. He had totally underestimated her. He had assumed she was just a quiet accountant who blindly followed instructions. He never bothered to check if she had inserted her own protective clauses into the federal tax documents. Thomas, DeAndre said, trying to keep the rising panic out of his voice. Give me 24 hours. I will file an emergency injunction and have a judge nullify that clause. Just hold the loan approval. I am sorry, DeAndre Thomas replied, his tone final. We cannot hold a $50 million commitment on a contested asset. The loan is officially denied. Furthermore, until you resolve this ownership dispute, JP Morgan is freezing all existing credit lines associated with your brother-in-law firm to mitigate our own risk exposure. Wait, Thomas, do not do that, DeAndre practically shouted. But the line went dead. The bank had hung up. DeAndre sat in the deafening silence of his luxurious office, staring at the legal document on his screen. The $50 million was gone. The credit lines were frozen. The grand empire they had celebrated just hours ago was crumbling before it even began. DeAndre slammed his fist onto the thick glass of his desk, the sound echoing sharply in the absolute silence of his corner office. He grabbed his cell phone and immediately dialed Bradley's private number. It rang 4 times before Bradley finally answered, his voice lazy and full of self-satisfaction. Bradley, get to my office right now, DeAndre ordered, skipping any form of professional greeting. We have a catastrophic problem. Relax, DeAndre Bradley replied smoothly through the phone. I am at the design showroom with Elise. We are currently picking out imported Italian marble for the new penthouse foyer. Whatever minor paperwork issue you have can wait until after lunch. DeAndre felt a vein throb in his temple. He gripped the phone tighter. This is not a minor paperwork issue, Bradley. Thomas Mitchell from JP Morgan just called me. The bank flatly denied the $50 million commercial loan. Do not ask questions. Just get in your car and get here now. He hung up the phone before Bradley could argue. 20 minutes later, the heavy oak doors of DeAndre's office swung open. Bradley marched in wearing a casual designer sweater and a highly annoyed expression. He did not look like a man whose empire was crumbling. He looked like a spoiled child who had just been interrupted during playtime. What is this nonsense about the bank denying the loan? Bradley demanded, pacing aggressively across the expensive Persian rug. I have major contractors waiting for their deposit wires by noon today. Call Thomas back right now and tell him to stop playing games with my money. DeAndre stood up slowly, unbuttoning his suit jacket. Thomas is not playing games, Bradley. JP Morgan just pulled the plug entirely. They are not giving you the $50 million. Worse than that, their compliance department is completely freezing every single existing credit line tied to your development firm until further notice. Bradley stopped pacing abruptly. The healthy color drained completely from his face, leaving him pale and wide-eyed. Are you insane? They cannot do that to me. We gave them the clear title to the 50 acres of waterfront property. We gave them the signed divorce petition. You sat in my living room and told me the prenuptial agreement made my personal assets completely bulletproof. The prenuptial agreement is bulletproof. DeAndre shot back, his voice rising in genuine frustration. But the prenuptial agreement does not cover the ironclad trust. You told me Nora was just a silent director. You explicitly told me she just signed where you told her to sign in order to keep the federal tax auditors off your back. She is just an accountant, Bradley yelled, throwing his hands up in the air. She does not know the first thing about high-level corporate law. She knows enough to bury us both, DeAndre countered. He grabbed his computer monitor and turned it around so Bradley could see the screen. Read it. Bradley, Clause 4, B. She secretly inserted a unilateral fail-safe into the operational bylaws of the trust 3 years ago. When you handed her those divorce papers on Saturday night in front of half the city, you legally triggered that exact clause. She locked down the bank accounts. She froze the deed to the property. You do not have clear title to the land anymore because you cannot legally access it without her direct physical signature. Bradley stared at the dense legal text on the screen, his mouth opening and closing in absolute disbelief. You are the highest-paid corporate lawyer in this city, he spat, turning his intense anger directly onto his brother-in-law. You were supposed to review these exact documents 3 years ago. You let my wife steal 50 acres of prime real estate right out from under me. This is your fault. Do not you dare try to pin this on me, DeAndre fired back, stepping around the large desk to confront Bradley face to face. I practically begged you not to use a blind trust to dodge the Internal Revenue Service. I told you it was incredibly risky, but you wanted to save millions in taxes, so you used your wife's clean professional background to hide the money. You handed a brilliant forensic accountant the keys to your entire empire, and you did not even bother to read the fine print she drafted. Then fix it, Bradley demanded, his voice cracking with rising undeniable panic. You are a lawyer. File a motion today. Take her to court. Tell the judge she acted in bad faith and illegally seized our corporate assets. DeAndre let out a bitter, exhausted laugh. Take her to court. Are you actually hearing yourself right now? Think about what you are asking me to do. If we drag Nora into a public courtroom to fight over the legal ownership of the ironclad trust, we have to explain to a federal judge exactly why the trust was created in the first place. Bradley went completely silent, the horrific realization finally sinking in. Exactly, DeAndre said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, terrifying whisper. If we sue her, we have to admit on public record that you set up the trust specifically to commit federal tax fraud. We have to admit that you have been hiding tens of millions of dollars from the United States government. She will not just take your land, Bradley. She will hand your hidden financial ledgers straight to the authorities. You will go to federal prison. And as the lawyer who signed off on the original business structure, I will be disbarred and sent to prison right alongside you. Bradley collapsed heavily into one of the expensive leather guest chairs opposite the desk. The sheer reality of the situation was finally crushing his arrogant facade. Federal prison. It was not a threat DeAndre made lightly. The United States government did not care about family legacy or high society status when it came to hiding $50 million in taxable assets. DeAndre did not waste another second looking at his panicked brother-in-law. He slammed his hand onto his intercom button and barked an order for his senior paralegal to drop everything and come to the office immediately. Within minutes, a young, terrified-looking law clerk rushed in, carrying a massive stack of physical files. Pull every single formation document, tax filing, and operational bylaw associated with the ironclad trust, DeAndre commanded, stripping off his custom suit jacket and rolling up his sleeves. I need every addendum. I need every signature page. We are going to tear this trust apart line by line until we find a loophole. There has to be a clerical error, a missing notary stamp, something we can use to invalidate the structure without triggering a federal audit. For the next 3 hours, the grand corner office was dead silent, except for the frantic rustling of paper and the rapid clicking of DeAndre typing on his keyboard. Bradley sat frozen in his chair, nervously chewing his thumbnail. He was constantly checking his phone as Elise sent him ignorant, happy text messages about buying expensive Italian marble for their new foyer. DeAndre spread the massive blueprint of the corporate structure across his glass desk. He traced the flow of money from Bradley Original Holding Company through 2 different shell corporations and finally into the Ironclad Trust. He was looking for a weakness, a backdoor he could exploit. But the deeper he dug into the paperwork Nora had drafted 3 years ago, the colder his blood ran. He realized he had committed the ultimate sin of arrogance. He had judged her based on her simple clothes and quiet demeanor, forgetting that her entire career was built on dismantling complex financial crimes. She did not just crunch numbers, she engineered traps. He stopped reading. He slowly took off his reading glasses and rubbed his eyes. A feeling of absolute defeat washed over him. "Did you find something?" Bradley asked, his voice laced with desperate hope. "A mistake. A way out." DeAndre looked up, his dark eyes hollow. "It is not just the freeze clause, Bradley. I was so focused on the lockdown provision that I completely missed the underlying foundation of the entire trust. She did not just give herself emergency veto power over the bank accounts. Look at how she classified the initial transfer of the 50 acres of waterfront property." DeAndre spun the document around and pointed to a specific paragraph buried on page 62. It was written in flawless, impenetrable legal terminology. "When you moved the land deed and the $40 million in liquid capital into the trust to avoid the federal property taxes," DeAndre explained, his voice devoid of all emotion, "you did not classify it as a corporate investment. To make it completely invisible to the Internal Revenue Service, Nora structured the transfer as an irrevocable gift to the trust entity." Bradley stared blankly. "What does that mean in English, DeAndre?" "It means you do not own it anymore," DeAndre said, pronouncing every word with brutal clarity. "You gave it away, completely and legally. Because Nora is the sole legal beneficiary of the Ironclad Trust, you essentially gifted her 50 acres of prime Manhattan real estate and $40 million in cash. She owns the land, Bradley. She owns the money. She can sell the property tomorrow to a rival developer, and you would not be entitled to a single penny of the profits." Bradley shot out of his chair, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "She cannot do that. That is my family money. That is my project." "It was your project," DeAndre corrected sharply. "Now it is her property. And she executed this masterstroke right under our noses. She used my own legal advice about avoiding taxes to trap you. She knew exactly what she was doing 3 years ago. She built a financial fortress, locked herself inside with all your money, and over the weekend you practically handed her the key and begged her to lock the door." Bradley began to hyperventilate, pacing frantically around the room. "Elise has contractors showing up at the penthouse right now. I have investors expecting a groundbreaking ceremony next month. We have to call her. We have to make a deal. Offer her $5 million to sign the trust back over to us." DeAndre let out a dark, humorless chuckle. $5 million. "Bradley, she is legally holding an asset worth nearly $100 million in future revenue. She does not want your $5 million. She wants to watch you burn." The Tuesday morning rush at the artisanal coffee shop in Midtown Manhattan was beginning to die down. I sat at a small corner table near the window, my laptop open, reviewing the latest compliance reports for one of my legitimate clients. The steaming cup of matcha latte next to my keyboard was completely untouched. I knew he was coming. I had intentionally left the location tracking active on the corporate phone Bradley had given me years ago. I wanted them to find me. I wanted to see the exact moment the arrogant confidence completely drained from their faces. The heavy glass door of the cafe swung open. DeAndre stepped inside. He was wearing his signature charcoal pinstripe suit, looking every bit the ruthless corporate shark he pretended to be. But my highly trained eyes caught the subtle cracks in his perfectly crafted armor. His expensive silk tie was slightly crooked, The bags under his dark eyes were heavy, indicating he had not slept a single minute last night. He scanned the room, locked eyes with me, and marched over with heavy, deliberate steps. He did not ask for permission before pulling out the chair directly across from me and sitting down. He slammed a thick red legal folder onto the small wooden table. It landed with a loud thud, causing a few patrons nearby to stop their conversations and turn their heads. I did not flinch. I kept my eyes focused on my laptop screen, typing a few final numbers into my spreadsheet before slowly looking up at him. "Good morning, DeAndre," I said, keeping my voice light and conversational. "I would offer to buy you a coffee, but I assume your bank accounts are currently experiencing some unexpected technical difficulties." DeAndre leaned forward, resting his massive forearms on the table. He ignored my comment, opting instead for the classic intimidation tactic he used to break witnesses during aggressive depositions. "Do you have any idea what kind of fire you are playing with, Nora?" he growled, keeping his voice dangerously low. "This folder contains a draft of a massive federal lawsuit. I have an entire team of junior associates ready to file it at the district courthouse by noon today." I raised an eyebrow, calmly picking up my matcha latte. "A federal lawsuit? On what grounds exactly?" DeAndre tapped his thick index finger against the red folder. "Corporate espionage, grand larceny, fraudulent conversion of business assets. You illegally hijacked the Ironclad Trust. You used your position as a trusted spouse to embezzle 50 acres of commercial real estate and $40 million in liquid capital. When I file this injunction, the judge will not just freeze the trust. He will freeze every single personal bank account you have ever opened. He will issue an immediate warrant for your arrest. Your prestigious accounting firm will fire you before the sun goes down, and you will spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary." He paused, letting the heavy, terrifying threats hang in the air between us. He was waiting for me to break. He was waiting for the quiet, subservient wife he had humiliated at the charity gala to panic, apologize profusely, and sign everything away just to avoid a messy legal battle. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my drink. I set the cup down carefully on the ceramic saucer. Then I smiled directly at him. "You are bluffing, DeAndre," I stated plainly. "And honestly, it is a rather insulting bluff for a corporate lawyer of your supposed caliber." His jaw tightened. His dark eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "I assure you, Nora, I do not bluff when $50 million is on the line. I am giving you one single chance to walk away from this cleanly. I have a release form right here inside this folder. You sign over your director rights to the trust, and Bradley will agree to give you a $1 million settlement. You take the money, you walk away, and nobody goes to prison." I laughed softly. It was a genuine sound of pure amusement. $1 million? That is incredibly generous of Bradley, considering he technically has $0 to his name right now. But let us talk about this federal lawsuit you are threatening me with. In order to charge me with embezzling corporate funds, you have to legally prove that the funds actually belong to his corporation in the first place. I leaned forward, mirroring his aggressive posture, but my voice remained completely calm and analytical. We both know the 50 acres and the $40 million were not registered as corporate assets. They were registered as an irrevocable personal gift to the Ironclad Trust, a trust of which I am the sole legal beneficiary. You cannot steal something that was legally gifted to you. DeAndre swallowed hard, the muscles in his thick neck flexing visibly. You manipulated the formation paperwork, he accused, though his voice lacked its previous booming authority. No, I corrected sharply. I drafted the paperwork exactly as the federal tax code dictates. If Bradley wanted to retain total ownership of the land, he should have paid the capital gains taxes on it. But he did not want to pay the government. He wanted to hide his wealth. He wanted a blind trust, and he explicitly ordered me to set it up. I simply followed his arrogant instructions. The fact that he did not bother to read the legal documents he signed is not my problem. It is his. And as his primary legal counsel, it is yours. DeAndre stared at me, the terrifying reality of the situation washing over him once again. I watched the last remaining shreds of his corporate confidence evaporate into the coffee shop air. He knew he had absolutely nothing to use against me. DeAndre sat completely frozen. The bustling noise of the artisanal coffee shop seemed to fade into the background as the devastating reality of my words finally penetrated his thick skull. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open, the intimidating corporate shark persona dissolving right in front of my eyes. He reached out and closed the red legal folder, sliding it slowly back across the table as if it had suddenly caught fire. "You used the Delaware loophole," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the espresso machines. I nodded slowly, taking another measured sip of my matcha latte. I did. When Bradley came to me 3 years ago, terrified that the federal government was going to tax the absolute life out of his new waterfront project, he demanded a flawless shield. "You were the one who suggested registering the holding company in Delaware for the privacy benefits." "It was decent advice, DeAndre. Delaware has the strongest corporate veil in the country, but a basic holding company still leaves a paper trail leading right back to the primary investor. If the Internal Revenue Service decided to audit Bradley, they would have pierced that corporate veil in a matter of weeks." DeAndre swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the wooden table. "So you suggested the blind trust." "I suggested an irrevocable trust," I corrected him smoothly. "There is a massive legal distinction, and as a senior partner at a prestigious law firm, you should really know the difference. A revocable trust would have left Bradley with the power to alter or cancel the arrangement, which means the government could still claim he had constructive control over the assets. The only way to make the money completely invisible to federal tax auditors was to sever his legal connection to it entirely. He had to execute a total and absolute divestment. He had to give it away. And he gave it to you." DeAndre said, the sheer stupidity of his brother-in-law finally becoming clear to him. "He gifted it to the Ironclad Trust," I replied. "And because I drafted the operational bylaws, I designated myself as the sole, unremovable beneficiary. I filed the paperwork exactly as he instructed me to. He signed every single page without reading a single paragraph. He was so incredibly eager to hide $50 million from the government that he handed the entire fortune directly to the wife he was secretly planning to discard." DeAndre rubbed his temples, a desperate look washing over his face. "But the prenuptial agreement," he started, though his voice lacked any real conviction. "The prenuptial agreement explicitly states that any assets acquired during the marriage remain the sole property of the original owner." I smiled, setting my cup down on the saucer with a soft clink. "DeAndre, you wrote that prenuptial agreement to protect Bradley from me. You made sure I could never claim a dime of his corporate earnings or his family inheritance in a divorce, but you failed to anticipate the reverse scenario. The prenuptial agreement protects separate property. When Bradley voluntarily signed the deed to the waterfront property and transferred $40 million into a trust that I exclusively control, it ceased to be his property. It became a legally documented, irrevocable gift. And under the very same prenuptial agreement, you are so proud of gifts given to a spouse during the marriage belong entirely to the recipient." I leaned forward, making sure he caught every single word. "Your brilliant prenuptial agreement is the exact document that prevents Bradley from ever taking this land back. You literally locked him out of his own empire." DeAndre looked sick. His expensive charcoal suit suddenly looked heavy and suffocating. He realized that the trap was not just perfect, it was inescapable. If he tried to challenge the trust in court, he would have to argue that the gift was fake. "If you file that federal lawsuit," I continued, my tone dropping to a hard, unforgiving register, "you will have to stand in front of a federal judge and explain that the irrevocable trust was actually a fraudulent shell company designed to evade tens of millions of dollars in federal taxes. The moment you make that argument, the judge will hand the case over to the criminal division of the Internal Revenue Service. Bradley will be indicted for tax fraud, money laundering, and filing false financial instruments." I paused, letting my eyes bore directly into his. And because your signature is on the original Delaware Incorporation papers as the advising attorney, they will indict you too. They will strip you of your law license. You will lose your corner office, your massive corporate salary, and that beautiful summer home your wife is currently trying to buy in the Hamptons. You will both go to federal prison. DeAndre let out a shaky breath, his hands trembling slightly as they rested on the table. He was a man who made his living destroying other people, but he had never faced an opponent who had completely dismantled him before the fight even began. He knew I was right. Every single legal avenue he had was a dead end that led directly to his own destruction. "What do you want, Nora?" he finally asked, his voice completely broken. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the absolute terror in his eyes. "I want exactly what Bradley wanted when he handed me those divorce papers in front of half the city. I want you to walk away with absolutely nothing." DeAndre stared at me across the small cafe table, his chest rising and falling with heavy, uneven breaths. The pristine image of the invincible Manhattan corporate lawyer had completely shattered. He slowly reached for his cup of black coffee, but his hand was shaking so badly he had to put it right back down on the saucer. "There has to be a middle ground here," Nora DeAndre said, his voice stripped of all its previous arrogance. He was practically begging now. "You cannot just take the entire $50 million and the land. Bradley will not survive it. The family business will instantly go bankrupt. If you do this, you are destroying generations of wealth." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. "Bradley destroyed his own wealth the moment he decided to commit federal tax evasion," I replied calmly. "Let us talk about what I actually know, DeAndre, because you seem to think this is just a minor dispute over a piece of property. It is not. As a forensic accountant, my entire job is to track where the dirty money goes, and Bradley left a trail so wide a first-year auditing student could follow it." DeAndre flinched. "What exactly do you think you know?" "I know everything," I stated flatly. "I know that for the past 3 years, Bradley has been deliberately underreporting the corporate revenue of his development firm to the Internal Revenue Service. I know he falsified over 200 contractor invoices on the downtown commercial projects. He claimed massive business expenses for construction materials that were never actually purchased. He took the untaxed profit from those fake invoices and funneled it directly into the Ironclad Trust. He used the trust to wash the money clean, bypassing capital gains taxes, corporate taxes, and personal income taxes." DeAndre's face turned a pale, sickly shade of gray. It was obvious from his expression that Bradley had lied to him. DeAndre knew about the trust, but he clearly did not know about the falsified contractor invoices. Bradley had used his own brother-in-law to set up the legal structure, but he had kept the actual criminal embezzlement a secret to avoid paying legal consulting fees. "You did not know about the fake invoices, did you?" I asked, watching the horror spread across his face. "You thought he was just using a legal loophole to avoid standard property taxes, but he was actively laundering embezzled corporate funds. And because your name and your prestigious law firm's seal are all over the trust formation documents, the federal government will view you as his primary co-conspirator. You are on the hook for a $50 million money laundering operation, DeAndre." He rubbed his hands over his face, letting out a long, ragged exhale. "He lied to me. He told me the seed money for the trust came from a legitimate private investor." "Well, he lied to both of us," I said without a single ounce of sympathy. But unlike you, I did not just take his word for it. When he handed me those divorce papers at the charity gala, he assumed I was just a naive wife who would quietly pack my bags and cry. He had no idea that for the last 6 months I had been making highly encrypted copies of every single financial ledger his company possessed. I tapped my fingers against the lid of my laptop. While he was out buying expensive diamonds for Elise using stolen pension funds, I was building a master dossier on his entire criminal enterprise. I have the original fake invoices. I have the routing numbers for the offshore accounts he used to bounce the money before dropping it into the trust. I have digital copies of his personal emails instructing his accounting department to alter the quarterly revenue reports. I have absolute, undeniable proof of a massive federal crime. DeAndre looked at my laptop as if it were a ticking bomb sitting right in the middle of the coffee shop. "You cannot give that to the authorities," he whispered, his eyes wide with genuine panic. "If you turn that over, the collateral damage will be catastrophic. My wife and I will lose everything. My career will be over instantly." "Your career is already over, DeAndre," I corrected him coldly. "The only thing you get to decide today is whether you lose your career from the comfort of a cheap apartment or from the inside of a federal prison cell. You came here this morning to threaten me with a massive lawsuit. You tried to intimidate me and strip me of my dignity just like you and your family did at that gala. But the game is over." I closed my laptop and slid it into my leather bag. I stood up from the table, looking down at the broken man sitting across from me. "You are going to go back to your fancy corner office," I instructed him, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. "You are going to tell Bradley that the Ironclad Trust is legally untouchable. You are not going to file any lawsuits, and you are not going to draft any more empty threats. If I receive so much as a single legal notice from your firm, or if Bradley tries to send his security thugs after me, I will hit send on an email directly to my primary contact at the Criminal Division of the Internal Revenue Service." DeAndre did not argue. He did not threaten me. He just sat there staring blankly at the cold cup of coffee in front of him, entirely paralyzed by the reality of his own destruction. I turned my back on the high-powered lawyer and walked out of the cafe, stepping into the bright, busy streets of Manhattan. The financial trap was fully set, and the family that had treated me like garbage for 5 years was finally bleeding out. DeAndre stumbled out of the artisanal coffee shop and into the bright sunlight of Midtown Manhattan. He felt physically ill. The expensive charcoal suit he wore suddenly felt like a straitjacket. He signaled his private driver, climbed into the back of the black town car, and gave a single breathless instruction to head straight to the headquarters of Bradley Real Estate Firm. He spent the entire 15-minute ride staring blankly out the tinted window, realizing that his entire pristine legal career was hanging by a single terrifying thread. When DeAndre pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of the executive suite, he found a scene that made his stomach violently churn. Bradley was leaning against his massive desk, holding a glass of scotch and laughing. Sylvia was sitting on a plush leather sofa, flipping through a luxury real estate catalog. Gemma was standing next to a massive whiteboard, using a dry erase marker to list the guest list for the summer solstice party she was planning to host at the $12 million Hamptons estate. They were completely oblivious. They were happily spending millions of dollars they no longer possessed. Bradley looked up, flashing a bright, arrogant grin. "DeAndre, just the man I wanted to see. Tell me you filed the injunction. Elise is meeting with the public relations team in an hour, and we want to draft a press release stating that my disgruntled ex-wife is facing a massive federal lawsuit for corporate theft." DeAndre closed the heavy double doors behind him and locked them. He walked slowly to the center of the room. He did not sit down. He looked directly at Bradley, his dark eyes burning with a mixture of absolute rage and sheer terror. "There is no lawsuit, Bradley." DeAndre said, his voice entirely flat and devoid of its usual booming resonance. "There will be no press release, and if you so much as breathe the word theft to anyone in the media, you will be spending the rest of your life in a federal penitentiary." The laughter instantly died in Bradley's throat. He set his glass of scotch down on the desk. "What are you talking about? Did she refuse to sign the release form? I told you to intimidate her. I told you to break her. You did not tell me about the falsified invoices." DeAndre roared, the sudden explosion of volume causing both Sylvia and Gemma to physically jump. "You lied to me, Bradley. You sat in my office 3 years ago and swore to me that the $40 million you were moving into the Ironclad Trust was clean profit from legitimate private investors. You never told me you were doctoring contractor receipts to hide taxable revenue from the Internal Revenue Service." Bradley's face lost all its color. He took a step back, his arrogant posture completely collapsing. "How does she know about that?" "Because she is a forensic accountant, you absolute fool," DeAndre shouted, throwing his hands in the air. "That is what she does for a living. She does not just balance checkbooks, She hunts down financial fraud. She has been quietly making encrypted digital copies of your internal accounting ledgers for the last 6 months. She has the fake receipts. She has the routing numbers for your offshore accounts. She has absolute, undeniable proof that you committed massive federal tax evasion and used the trust to launder the stolen money. Sylvia dropped the real estate catalog onto the floor. Her hands flew to her mouth in pure shock. Bradley, tell me this is not true. Tell me you did not commit a federal crime. Bradley opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just stared at DeAndre, completely paralyzed by the reality of his own actions. Gemma, entirely incapable of grasping the severity of a criminal indictment, stepped forward and crossed her arms. Okay, fine, he cut some corners on his taxes. Everyone in real estate does it. But that does not mean we just let her steal the waterfront project. DeAndre, you have to fix this. I already told the real estate agent we are putting down a cash deposit on the Hamptons house tomorrow morning. We need that money. DeAndre turned to his wife, his expression hardening into a mask of pure disgust. There is no Hamptons house, Gemma. There is no waterfront project. The money is gone. She legally owns the trust, and if we challenge her ownership in court, she will hand the digital dossier over to the federal government. Do you understand what that means? They will not just arrest your brother. They will seize every single asset tied to his company. They will freeze our personal accounts because my law firm signature is on the formation documents. We will be absolutely ruined. DeAndre turned his attention back to Bradley, who was now trembling visibly. I am giving you official notice right now, DeAndre stated coldly. I am formally withdrawing as your legal counsel. My firm will no longer represent you or your development company in any capacity. You cannot do that, Bradley pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. You are family. You have to help me clean this up. I am doing this to save myself from going down with your sinking ship, DeAndre replied, turning his back on his brother-in-law. Do exactly what she says, Bradley. Do not contact her. Do not threaten her. Just pray she decides to leave you with your freedom, because she has already taken everything else. DeAndre unlocked the doors and walked out, leaving the family standing in absolute, terrified silence. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind DeAndre, leaving a deafening silence in the executive suite. For a long moment, nobody moved. Bradley stood frozen behind his massive desk, his face drained of all color. The arrogant, untouchable chief executive officer had completely vanished, replaced by a terrified man staring at the absolute destruction of his own life. Sylvia was the first to break the silence. She slowly stood up from the plush leather sofa, her hands shaking so violently she had to grip the edge of the glass coffee table to steady herself. Bradley, she whispered, her voice trembling, tell me DeAndre was lying. Tell me you did not commit federal tax fraud. Tell me you did not give that awful woman all of our money. Bradley could not look his mother in the eye. He sank into his expensive leather chair and buried his face in his hands. It was supposed to be a standard tax strategy, he mumbled defensively. Everyone in commercial real estate uses offshore accounts to minimize capital gains. I just needed a clean name for the trust director so the auditors would not look twice. How was I supposed to know she was secretly downloading my internal accounting ledgers? Sylvia let out a sharp gasp, pressing her manicured hand to her chest. You absolute fool! She hissed, her maternal affection instantly evaporating into pure, self-centered panic. You handed the keys to our entire family legacy to a vindictive accountant. Do you have any idea what will happen to us if the federal government indicts you? We will be ruined. I will be blacklisted from the country club. My friends will read about this in the newspapers. Gemma, entirely incapable of processing anything that did not directly affect her immediate desires, rolled her eyes and let out an annoyed huff. Stop being so dramatic, Mother, Gemma snapped. She pulled her solid metal American Express card out of her designer purse. DeAndre is just throwing a tantrum because he hates dealing with messy paperwork. I am not letting some ridiculous argument over taxes ruin my summer solstice party. I am calling the real estate agent right now to wire the deposit for the Hamptons estate. Gemma tapped the screen of her phone and placed it on speaker. The phone rang twice before a polite professional voice answered. Good morning, Miss Gemma. How can the concierge service assist you today? Hi, Richard, Gemma said in her usual demanding tone. I need to authorize an immediate wire transfer of $200,000 for a real estate deposit. Run it through my primary platinum account tied to the family trust. There was a brief pause on the other end, accompanied by the faint sound of typing. Certainly, Miss Gemma. One moment, please. Bradley lifted his head, his eyes widening in sudden realization. Gemma. Wait. Do not run that card. J.P. Morgan froze the credit lines. It was too late. Miss Gemma, the concierge said, his professional tone shifting into one of uncomfortable hesitation. I am terribly sorry, but the transaction has been declined. In fact, it appears your primary account has been completely suspended. Gemma scoffed loudly. Suspended. That is impossible. I have a limitless balance. Run my secondary card, the one tied directly to the corporate expense account. I am trying, ma'am, the concierge replied nervously. But the entire profile is locked. There is a fraud prevention hold placed by the Central Compliance Department at J.P. Morgan. It says the corporate guarantor is currently under administrative review. I cannot process any transactions for you at this time. Gemma's face contorted in absolute fury. She ended the call and frantically opened the banking application on her phone. She typed in her password, fully expecting to see millions of dollars in available credit. Instead, the screen flashed a bright red error message. Account frozen. Please contact your branch manager. She dropped her phone onto the desk. It is frozen, she whispered, her voice cracking. Bradley, my cards are declining. All of them. Sylvia practically ripped her own phone out of her handbag. Her fingers trembled as she logged into her private wealth management portal. She watched in sheer horror as the same red error message appeared on her screen. The family wealth was entirely interconnected. Bradley had used the massive corporate valuation to secure the personal credit lines for his mother and sister. When I triggered the lockdown on the ironclad trust, I did not just cut off the business. I severed the financial oxygen to the entire family. My accounts are locked. Sylvia shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the luxurious office. My shopping accounts, my salon memberships, everything is completely gone. Bradley, fix this right now. Call the bank and tell them there has been a mistake. I cannot call the bank, Bradley yelled back, finally snapping under the immense pressure. He slammed his fists onto his desk. Did you not listen to a single word DeAndre just said? The bank will not speak to me. Nora legally owns the collateral. I have absolutely zero power. Gemma burst into loud, hysterical tears, sinking to the floor in her expensive silk dress. Sylvia stared at her golden child, the son she had praised and elevated her entire life, and saw nothing but a massive, terrifying liability. The illusion of their absolute superiority had been shattered in a matter of minutes. They had spent 5 years treating me like garbage because I did not come from money. Now they were standing in a multi-million-dollar office completely penniless. Sylvia began pacing the length of the room. Her mind was racing, desperately trying to find a way to preserve her precious social standing. She refused to let a woman she viewed as a peasant destroy the family dynasty. If DeAndre is too much of a coward to handle this, then I will do it myself, Sylvia declared. She pointed a manicured finger at Bradley. You call your public relations team and spin a story to buy us some time. I am going to go see your ex-wife. Everyone has a price. I will find hers, and I will buy our lives back. Sylvia turned on her heel and marched out of the executive suite, her expensive heels clicking furiously against the hardwood floor. Gemma scrambled up from the ground, wiping her mascara-stained cheeks, and blindly followed her mother out the door. Bradley was left standing completely alone in the deafening silence of his office. His chest heaved as he stared at the empty doorway. He walked over to his liquor cabinet, his hands trembling slightly, and poured himself another heavy glass of scotch. He downed it in one burning swallow. The heavy wooden doors swung open again. Elise strolled into the room, holding two heavy slabs of imported Italian marble. She looked perfectly oblivious to the absolute catastrophe that had just unfolded. She placed the marble samples on his desk with a loud clatter. "Bradley, darling, what on earth is going on?" Elise asked, her brow furrowed in confusion. "I just saw DeAndre storming out to the elevators, looking like he had seen a ghost, and Gemma was practically sobbing in the hallway. Did something happen with the contractors?" Bradley stared at the marble samples. The sheer cost of those two small pieces of stone was more than most people made in a month. He could not bring himself to tell his new young mistress that he was entirely broke. His massive ego simply would not allow him to admit that his quiet, unassuming ex-wife had completely outsmarted him. Denial washed over him thick and intoxicating. He convinced himself that DeAndre was just being a cowardly lawyer overreacting to a minor legal hurdle. "It is nothing you need to worry about." Bradley lied smoothly, walking around the desk to wrap his arms around her waist. "It is just a temporary liquidity issue. Nora is throwing a final pathetic tantrum. She found a technical loophole in the trust paperwork and put a temporary freeze on the accounts. She is just trying to squeeze a settlement out of me because she is jealous of what we are building together." Elise sighed dramatically, leaning her head against his chest. "I told you we should have cut her off sooner. She is completely obsessed with you. How long is this freeze going to delay the groundbreaking?" "It will not delay anything," Bradley promised, his voice dripping with forced confidence. "I am going to handle her today. Go back to the showroom and finish picking out the fixtures for the penthouse. I will transfer some funds from a secondary account to cover your expenses." He kissed her forehead and guided her out of the office. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, his fake smile vanished. He rushed back to his desk and grabbed his phone. He knew DeAndre was right about one thing. He could not fight Nora in a courtroom without exposing his own tax fraud. But Bradley had spent his entire life in the ruthless world of Manhattan real estate. He knew that the court of public opinion was often far more damaging than a federal judge. He scrolled through his contacts and dialed the number for Trent. Trent was a high-priced, morally bankrupt crisis management consultant who specialized in burying corporate scandals and destroying reputations. He answered on the first ring. "Trent." "We have a massive problem," Bradley said, gripping the edge of his desk. "My ex-wife is trying to hijack my commercial development project. She locked the trust accounts and is threatening to go to the federal authorities with fabricated financial documents to claim I committed tax fraud. I need you to completely destroy her credibility before she can make a single move." Trent chuckled darkly on the other end of the line. "That is exactly what you pay me a monthly retainer for, Bradley. Give me the angle. How do you want to play this?" Bradley paced back and forth across the Persian rug, his mind racing with vicious ideas. "Nora relies entirely on her pristine professional reputation. She is a forensic accountant. Trust is her only currency. I want you to leak a story to every major financial tabloid in the city. Tell them she is a bitter, mentally unstable ex-wife who could not handle our divorce. Say she illegally accessed my corporate servers, stole confidential trade secrets, and is now trying to extort my family for millions of dollars. I can have that drafted and leaked to 3 different media outlets by tomorrow morning," Trent confirmed smoothly. "We will paint her as a massive corporate liability. Her accounting firm will panic the moment the story hits the press." "Exactly." Bradley sneered, feeling a sudden false surge of power. "I want her managing partners to see her as a toxic threat to their high-net-worth clients. Make the allegations look incredibly credible. Mention that she used her professional clearance to embezzle funds. When her firm fires her and the entire financial sector thinks she is a vengeful lying thief, nobody at the Internal Revenue Service will ever believe a word she says about my taxes." "Consider it done," Trent said before hanging up. Bradley dropped his phone onto the desk. He took a deep breath, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive sweater. He actually believed his own delusional plan. He thought that by throwing enough dirt on my name, he could bury the truth forever. He thought he could bully me into unfreezing his precious $50 million to save my own career. He had absolutely no idea that I was already 10 steps ahead of his pathetic smear campaign. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the financial district of Manhattan was buzzing with a brand new scandal. I was sitting at my glass desk on the 40th floor of my accounting firm, reviewing a corporate audit for a client when my phone began to vibrate violently. It was a relentless flood of text messages, emails, and breaking news alerts from people I had not spoken to in years. I picked up the phone and opened the primary financial news website that everyone on Wall Street read. Dominating the top of the front page was a massive, highly sensationalized article. The bold headline read, "Scorned ex-wife hijacks $50 million real estate empire in bitter divorce revenge." I clicked the link and read through the absolute garbage Trent and Bradley had fabricated overnight. It painted me as a mentally unstable, greedy accountant who could not handle the fact that her wealthy husband was moving on to a younger woman. It claimed I had illegally accessed secure corporate servers, stolen highly confidential trade secrets, and manipulated legal documents to extort the family business. The article went on to quote an anonymous inside source, clearly Trent, who stated that I was currently under federal investigation for corporate espionage and massive embezzlement. It was a classic ruthless smear campaign. Bradley wanted to destroy the one thing I valued most, my professional reputation. He knew that in the high-stakes world of forensic accounting, absolute trust is your only currency. If wealthy clients think you are unstable or corrupt, your entire career is instantly terminated. I looked up from my phone screen. The open floor plan of the firm was suddenly very quiet. Junior analysts and senior accountants were staring at me from over their computer monitors. The whispering started immediately. My desk phone rang loud and clear. It was the executive assistant for the managing partners. She told me I needed to come to the main boardroom right this second. I stood up, smoothed out my skirt, and grabbed my encrypted laptop. I did not look panicked. I walked straight through the middle of the office with my head held high. When I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the boardroom, I found the 3 senior partners standing around the massive oak table looking incredibly stressed. "Nora, please sit down." The senior managing partner, David, said, his voice tight with anxiety. "We have a very serious situation. 3 of our largest corporate clients have already called to ask if the woman accused of massive financial extortion in the morning papers is the same woman handling their accounts." I remained standing. "I know, David. I just read the article." David rubbed his forehead in sheer frustration. "We cannot have this kind of exposure, Nora. If you are involved in a hostile corporate takeover and facing embezzlement charges, we have to put you on immediate unpaid administrative leave pending a full internal investigation." I placed my laptop on the table and opened the lid. "I am not involved in a hostile corporate takeover," I said calmly. "I am involved in a divorce from a terrified man who realizes he is completely trapped." Another partner crossed his arms defensively. "The article says you stole $50 million from his real estate firm." I typed in my master password and turned the bright screen toward the 3 men. "The article is a desperate lie planted by a crisis manager," I explained. "My ex-husband is attempting to discredit me because he knows I possess undeniable proof of his criminal activities." The partners leaned over the table and looked at the screen. I had opened a highly secure time-stamped confirmation receipt from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. I had filed the encrypted evidence package late last night. "I am a forensic accountant," I reminded them, my voice projecting absolute professional confidence. "When I discovered that my husband was doctoring contractor invoices to evade tens of millions of dollars in federal taxes, I did exactly what my ethical obligations require. I secured the evidence. I locked his trust accounts to prevent further money laundering, and I submitted a formal whistleblower report to the federal government." David adjusted his glasses as he read the official government receipt. His eyes widened as the realization hit him. The firm was not employing a corporate thief. They were employing the person who had just caught one of the biggest tax evaders in New York real estate. Bradley thinks leaking a fake story to the tabloids will force me to panic and unlock his stolen money, I continued smoothly. But he just made the biggest mistake of his life. By making this public, he has forced the federal authorities to accelerate their timeline. David looked up from the screen, all of his previous panic replaced by profound respect. So the allegations against you are completely fabricated to cover up his tax fraud. Exactly, I nodded. I am not a liability to this firm, David. I am about to be the key witness in the largest federal tax indictment of the year. If you put me on leave today, it looks like this firm protects wealthy tax evaders and punishes ethical whistleblowers. The partners exchanged a long, silent look. The corporate calculus shifted instantly. They knew the massive public relations value of having a brilliant investigator on their staff. Close the door on your way out, Nora. David finally said, a small, genuine smile forming on his face. Take whatever time you need this week to handle your personal matters. Your job here is completely secure. I closed my laptop and walked out of the boardroom. Bradley had tried to fire his ultimate weapon, and it had not even left a single scratch. I returned to my desk feeling a profound sense of validation. The morning passed with surprising quiet. My phone stopped buzzing as the public relations team at my firm quietly issued a brief, devastatingly clinical statement to the press, denying the tabloid rumors. Bradley had tried to fire his ultimate weapon, and it had not even left a single scratch. Just after lunchtime, the internal phone on my desk chimed. It was the front desk receptionist down in the main lobby. She told me I had a personal visitor who was refusing to leave and was causing a scene about needing to see me for a family emergency. I took the glass elevator down to the ground floor. As the doors slid open, I saw her immediately. Sylvia was standing in the middle of the minimalist, ultra-modern lobby, looking entirely out of place among the sharp business professionals. She was wearing a massive mink fur coat and oversized designer sunglasses, gripping a crocodile skin handbag like a physical shield against the real world. She was pacing nervously back and forth across the polished marble floor, clearly unaccustomed to waiting for anything or anyone. When she saw me approach, her entire demeanor shifted in a split second. The arrogant, sneering woman who had mocked my cheap dress at the charity gala was gone. In her place was a frantic, desperately agreeable older woman trying to manufacture a warm maternal smile. Nora, my sweet girl, Sylvia cooed, stepping forward and reaching out with both arms to grab my hands. I took a deliberate step back, keeping my hands firmly at my sides. Her empty hands fell back to her expensive coat. She looked momentarily embarrassed, but quickly recovered her fake composure. "What are you doing here, Sylvia?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the vast marble lobby. Sylvia let out a dramatic practiced sigh. She looked around the lobby to ensure none of the passing executives were listening closely. "I came to apologize, Nora. I really did. I have not been able to sleep since that awful dinner. The things Bradley said to you at that horrible gala, the way Gemma acted, it was all completely unacceptable. You know how competitive and stressful the commercial real estate business is. Bradley has been under so much pressure lately with the new development project. He just snapped under the weight of it all. But you and I, we always understood each other, did we not? We are women who know how to stand our ground." I stared at her, genuinely amazed by her infinite capacity for delusion. "We never understood each other, Sylvia. For 5 years, you made it your personal mission to remind me that I was a peasant from Queens who had somehow infiltrated your precious high society bloodline. You never missed a single opportunity to humiliate me." "Oh, Nora, please do not hold on to the past," Sylvia pleaded, taking another step closer. "I was just being protective of my son. We are family, and family forgives. I know Bradley made a terrible mistake with that silly trust paperwork. He was just trying to protect our legacy from the greedy government. He did not mean to hurt you or put your career at risk. But this little feud has gone far enough. Look at what it is doing to us." She unclasped her heavy crocodile skin bag and reached inside. She pulled out a pristine white envelope and held it out toward me. Her manicured hands were visibly shaking. I want to make things right, Sylvia whispered, her eyes darting around nervously. I know J.P. Morgan froze the primary family accounts, but I have a private wealth management portfolio in Switzerland that DeAndre and Bradley do not even know about. It is my absolute emergency fund. Inside this envelope is a certified cashier check for $1 million. It is completely untraceable and ready to clear today. I looked down at the envelope but did not make a single move to take it. Take the money, Nora, Sylvia urged, her fake smile straining heavily at the edges. Take the $1 million. Start a fresh new life. Open your own accounting firm. Buy a beautiful house in a nice neighborhood. Just sign the director rights of the ironclad trust back over to Bradley, and we can all walk away from this terrible nightmare as friends. We will even call Trent and have him drop those silly tabloid stories immediately. You win. You proved your point. I looked at the woman who had tormented me for half a decade. She actually thought she could buy her way out of a massive federal tax indictment. She thought $1 million of hidden Swiss money would somehow erase the fact that her son was a criminal, and her family was built on a crumbling foundation of lies. I reached out and took the envelope from her trembling hand. Sylvia let out a massive, audible breath of relief. Her tense shoulders dropped. She thought she had won. She thought the poor girl from Queens had finally seen a number big enough to abandon her moral principles. I opened the envelope and pulled out the heavy watermarked check. It was indeed made out to me for exactly $1 million. I held it up to the lobby light, inspecting the Swiss bank signature. It is a very generous offer, Sylvia, I said softly. Especially considering your entire financial world is currently collapsing around you. You must be truly terrified of going broke to dip into your secret overseas accounts. I am just trying to save my family, Sylvia replied, her voice thick with fake manipulative emotion. So we have a deal. You will unlock the trust today and give Bradley his company back. I looked her directly in the eyes. Then with slow, deliberate precision, I gripped the top edge of the certified check and tore it straight down the middle. The sound of the thick watermarked paper tearing in half echoed louder than I expected in the quiet corporate lobby. I let the two pieces of the certified check flutter from my fingers. They landed on the pristine marble floor, resting right next to the tips of Sylvia's expensive designer shoes. For a full 10 seconds, Sylvia did not move. She just stared down at the ruined check, her brain completely unable to process what had just happened. In her world, money solved every single problem. Money bought silence. Money bought loyalty. The idea that someone would physically destroy $1 million in untraceable cash was entirely incomprehensible to her. Are you insane? Sylvia finally gasped. Her voice was no longer sweet or maternal. It was harsh, grating, and full of raw panic. Do you have any idea what you just did? I just saved you from adding felony bribery to your family growing list of federal charges, I replied, my tone completely flat and clinical. Did you honestly think I would take a payout from a hidden offshore account? The Internal Revenue Service already has my whistleblower report, Sylvia. If I took your Swiss money today, I would be legally complicit in your family money laundering operation. I am a forensic accountant. I do not take bribes, and I certainly do not take them from the exact people I am actively investigating. Sylvia's face twisted into an ugly mask of pure rage. She stepped forward, raising her hand as if she might actually strike me. You ungrateful little wretch, she spat, completely abandoning the fake apology. We took you in. We gave you a life you could never have dreamed of. You were a nobody before Bradley married you. And now you think you can destroy us over some minor tax paperwork. It is $50 million in stolen corporate revenue. I corrected her, refusing to back down a single inch. And you did not take me in, Sylvia. You tolerated me because Bradley needed a clean name to hide his dirty money. You spent 5 years treating me like an uneducated peasant. You mocked my clothes. You mocked my background. You allowed your daughter to treat me like a servant. You stood in the Waldorf Astoria 3 nights ago and told half of Manhattan that I was a pathetic charity case. Several executives in sharp business suits had stopped walking and were now watching the confrontation. The front desk receptionist was hovering nervously behind her computer monitor, her hand resting over the telephone. Sylvia noticed the audience, but she was too furious to care about her precious public image anymore. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my face. "I will make sure you never work in this city again," she screamed, her voice echoing off the high glass walls. "I will call the firm partners. I will tell them you are a thief. I will spend every last dime I have left to tie you up in court until you are begging on the street." "You do not have any dimes left, Sylvia," I reminded her coldly. "J.P. Morgan froze your accounts yesterday, and after today the federal government is going to start seizing your physical assets. You should probably hold on to that fur coat. You might need to sell it to pay for Bradley criminal defense attorney when the trial begins." Sylvia let out a loud hysterical shriek of absolute frustration. She lunged forward, grabbing the sleeve of my blazer. "You listen to me!" she demanded, her manicured nails digging painfully into the fabric. I did not try to pull away. I simply looked over her shoulder and caught the eye of the front desk receptionist. I gave her a single sharp nod. Less than 10 seconds later, two large building security guards in dark uniforms stepped out from the elevator bank. They moved quickly and silently across the marble floor. "Ma'am, you need to let go of her right now," the taller guard commanded, his voice deep and authoritative. Sylvia turned her furious gaze onto the guard. "Do not tell me what to do. Do you know who I am? I am Sylvia. I do not care who you are." The guard interrupted, stepping between us and physically breaking her grip on my arm. "You are causing a massive disturbance in a private corporate building. You need to leave the premises immediately, or we will have the police escort you out in handcuffs." The threat of being arrested in front of dozens of high-powered Wall Street executives finally pierced through Sylvia's hysterical rage. She looked around at the crowd of onlookers. People were whispering. Some were holding their phones, clearly recording the wealthy socialite having a massive public meltdown. The absolute humiliation she had tried to inflict on me at the charity gala was now being returned to her tenfold. She snatched her crocodile skin bag from the floor, her chest heaving with exertion. She shot me one final venomous look. "This is not over," she hissed. "It is for you," I replied simply. The two security guards flanked her on either side. They did not give her a chance to say another word. They firmly guided her toward the heavy glass revolving doors. I stood in the center of the lobby and watched the great matriarch of the family being physically escorted out of the building like a common trespasser. When she was finally gone, the lobby slowly returned to its normal quiet hum. I bent down, picked up the two torn halves of the $1 million check, and dropped them directly into the nearest trash can. Then I turned around and walked back to the elevators, entirely ready to watch Bradley face his absolute worst nightmare. I returned to the 40th floor of the accounting firm, my adrenaline running cool and steady. David and the head of our public relations department were waiting for me in my office. The tabloid story Bradley and his crisis manager Trent had planted was rapidly gaining traction online. Comment sections were already tearing my professional reputation apart. David asked if I wanted to issue a standard written denial and wait for the news cycle to pass. I shook my head. A written denial would look weak and defensive. I told them we needed to hold a live press conference. I was not just going to defend myself. I was going to completely obliterate the false narrative while the entire financial sector was watching. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the main media briefing room on the ground floor of our building was packed to full capacity. Dozens of financial journalists, local news crews, and independent bloggers had assembled. The crisis manager Bradley hired had done his job too well. He had whipped the media into a frenzy, promising them a scandalous story of a bitter, deranged accountant stealing a massive real estate empire. The reporters were expecting a tearful defensive apology. They had absolutely no idea they were about to witness a live corporate execution. I walked into the room flanked by David and our lead corporate counsel. I wore a sharp navy blue suit and carried no notes. The flashbulbs erupted in a blinding wave of white light the second I stepped up to the wooden podium. I adjusted the microphone. The room gradually fell into a tense, expectant silence. I looked directly into the center bank of television cameras, knowing that Bradley, DeAndre, and Sylvia were likely watching this live broadcast from their crumbling offices. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice projecting clearly and confidently across the room. "My name is Nora, and I am a senior forensic accountant at this firm. Early this morning, a heavily fabricated story was leaked to the press. It accused me of corporate espionage and extortion against my ex-husband Bradley and his commercial real estate development firm. I am here today to categorically deny those absurd allegations." I paused, letting the initial statement sink in before delivering the crushing blow. But more importantly, I am here to explain exactly why those lies were manufactured and why the leadership of that real estate firm is currently in a state of absolute panic. I gripped the edges of the podium. 3 years ago, Bradley instructed me to establish a blind trust named the Ironclad Trust. He claimed it was a standard legal shield for his new $50 million waterfront project. However, over the past 6 months, during a routine review of shared marital assets, I uncovered the devastating truth behind that specific money. The $50 million transferred into that trust was not legitimate profit. It was stolen. A loud collective gasp rippled through the room of seasoned journalists. Pens flew frantically across notepads. Cameras clicked in rapid succession. Bradley systematically falsified over 200 contractor invoices. I continued, my voice steady and unforgiving. He claimed massive construction expenses for building materials that never existed. He took the untaxed revenue, funneled it through untraceable offshore accounts, and dumped it directly into the Ironclad Trust to evade federal taxation. Furthermore, my investigation revealed that he diverted hundreds of thousands of dollars from his own employees' pension funds to finance his personal luxury lifestyle. The reporters began shouting over one another, desperately trying to ask questions. I raised my hand to silence them. When I discovered the sheer scale of this money laundering operation, I executed my legal right as the primary director of the trust to initiate a total administrative freeze. I locked the accounts to prevent any further theft. Last night, I submitted a fully encrypted comprehensive dossier containing his internal financial ledgers, the fake receipts, and the offshore routing numbers directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. I did not hijack his empire. I legally secured a massive crime scene. A reporter from a major financial television network shouted from the second row. "Nora, are you saying your ex-husband is currently under federal investigation for tax fraud?" I looked right at the reporter. "I am saying the federal government currently possesses undeniable documented proof of massive tax fraud. Any financial institution, private investor, or contractor currently doing business with his firm should immediately review their financial risk exposure." Another reporter yelled from the back. "Is his legal counsel involved? Does DeAndre know about this?" I smiled a cold, razor-sharp smile. "The federal authorities will determine the criminal complicity of anyone whose signature is on the original formation documents." I stepped back from the podium as the room completely erupted into chaos. Reporters were literally sprinting out the doors to call their editors and break the story. I walked out of the room with my head held high, knowing that Bradley had just lost everything. I returned to the quiet sanctuary of my office, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and turned on the television mounted on the wall. Every major news network had cut away from their regular afternoon programming to broadcast my press conference on an endless loop. The narrative had flipped in a matter of minutes. I was no longer the bitter, scorned ex-wife. I was the brilliant whistleblower who had exposed a $50 million criminal empire. My phone rang. It was a contact I had inside Bradley Development Firm, a junior accountant I had mentored years ago. She was whispering frantically, telling me to turn on the local helicopter news feed immediately. I switched the channel. The aerial camera was hovering directly above the sleek glass high-rise that housed Bradley corporate headquarters. I watched in deep satisfaction as a massive fleet of unmarked black government vehicles abruptly pulled up onto the plaza, completely blocking the main entrances. Dozens of federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters printed across the back poured out of the vehicles. They marched through the revolving doors, with empty cardboard boxes and federal warrants in their hands. The raid had officially begun. I did not just want to watch it on a screen. I wanted to see the end of his arrogance with my own eyes. I grabbed my coat, took the elevator down to the parking garage, and drove the 10 blocks to his building. By the time I parked my car across the street, the scene had descended into total chaos. A massive crowd of pedestrians, aggressive paparazzi, and confused investors had gathered around the perimeter held back by police barricades. Through the massive glass windows of the ground floor lobby, I could see federal agents securing the elevators and confiscating employee computers. Employees were being ushered out of the side exits, carrying small cardboard boxes filled with personal items. Among the crowd of weeping administrative assistants and terrified junior executives, I spotted Elise. She was standing on the curb, clutching her designer handbag, staring up at the building in absolute shock. The glamorous future she had envisioned, the billion-dollar empire she thought she had secured by sleeping with a married man, was disintegrating right in front of her. She looked lost, completely abandoned by the man who had promised her the world just 24 hours ago. I stood near the edge of the crowd, blending in perfectly, just another face, watching a billionaire fall from grace. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a panicked text message from Bradley. It simply read, "Call them off. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I will give you anything you want." I read the message, deleted it, and blocked his number. He still fundamentally misunderstood the situation. He thought I was playing a negotiation game. He did not realize that the federal government does not negotiate with tax evaders once the criminal warrants are signed. Suddenly, a ripple of shouting tore through the crowd. The heavy glass doors of the building swung open. 2 federal agents walked out first, clearing a path through the swarm of aggressive reporters. Right behind them was Bradley. The arrogant, untouchable chief executive officer was completely gone. His expensive designer sweater was wrinkled. His hair was a mess, and his hands were securely fastened behind his back in heavy steel handcuffs. The flashbulbs erupted, capturing his pale, terrified face for tomorrow front pages. He looked frantically around the crowd, his eyes wide with sheer panic, as reporters shouted questions about the stolen pension funds and the fake contractor invoices. This was the exact same man who had confidently handed me divorce papers next to a caviar bar, completely certain of his absolute superiority. Now, he was being paraded through the streets of Manhattan like a common criminal. Right behind him, looking equally pale and entirely defeated, was DeAndre. Despite his desperate attempt to formally withdraw as legal counsel earlier that morning, the federal agents had not cared. His signature was all over the fraudulent incorporation documents of the Ironclad Trust. DeAndre was not in handcuffs yet, but he was being closely escorted by 2 agents toward a separate government vehicle for formal questioning. His pristine, terrifying courtroom reputation was dead. He looked down at the pavement, refusing to make eye contact with the cameras, knowing his law license was as good as shredded. I watched as they pushed Bradley into the back of a dark vehicle. The public humiliation he had tried to inflict on me had boomeranged and hit him with the force of a freight train. The convoy pulled away from the curb, sirens wailing, leaving behind a heavily raided building and a shattered corporate legacy. I turned away from the chaotic scene and walked back to my car. The criminal justice system was finally handling the tax fraud. But my work was not entirely finished. Bradley was headed to a holding cell, but his company still technically had a board of directors. They had scheduled an emergency shareholder meeting for the following morning to try and salvage the ruins of the empire. They thought they could simply replace Bradley and move forward. They had absolutely no idea that I was going to be the one walking into that boardroom. The morning after the raid, the atmosphere inside the executive boardroom was incredibly toxic. The heavy oak doors were closed securely, but the panic radiating from the wealthy investors was absolutely palpable. Bradley had managed to post a massive bail late last night. He had been forced to use a highly questionable bail bondsman because his primary bank accounts were completely frozen by the federal authorities. He stood at the head of the massive conference table looking like a ghost of his former arrogant self. His custom-tailored suit was heavily wrinkled. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed the undeniable fact that he had spent the night sitting in a cold holding cell before his release. Sitting around the table were the 12 most powerful shareholders of the company. These were ruthless men and women who cared only about their profit margins. They had seen the evening news. They had watched federal agents carry boxes of physical evidence out of the building on live television. They knew the stock value of the development firm was currently in a terrifying freefall, and they were demanding immediate answers. Bradley placed his hands on the polished mahogany table, attempting to project a sense of absolute authority he no longer possessed. "Gentlemen and ladies," he began, his voice raspy and desperate. "I know the events of yesterday afternoon looked incredibly damaging, but I am standing here today to assure you that this company is fundamentally sound. The federal raid was nothing more than a massive misunderstanding triggered by a bitter, disgruntled ex-wife." An older shareholder named Richard, sitting near the center of the table, let out a loud, cynical scoff. "A misunderstanding, Bradley. Federal agents do not execute a fully mobilized raid on a corporate headquarters over a simple misunderstanding. They seized our internal servers. They confiscated the accounting ledgers. The morning papers are reporting that you falsified hundreds of contractor invoices to evade federal taxes. You have completely jeopardized our entire financial portfolio. Those allegations are entirely fabricated." Bradley shot back, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Nora is a forensic accountant. She knows exactly how to manipulate financial data to make it look highly suspicious. She is trying to extort me for a massive divorce settlement by weaponizing the Internal Revenue Service against our firm. I already have my criminal defense team working on a motion to dismiss the charges. The truth will come out, and my name will be entirely cleared of any wrongdoing." Another board member, a sharp woman in a gray suit, leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Your personal legal troubles are your own problem, Bradley. We only care about our money. What about the $50 million for the downtown waterfront project? The commercial contractors were supposed to receive their initial deposit wires yesterday morning. They are threatening to walk off the job entirely if they do not get paid by noon today. If we lose those contractors, the entire project collapses." Bradley swallowed hard. He was backed into an impossible corner. He had to lie to survive the morning meeting. "The $50 million is perfectly safe." He lied, his voice projecting a false, unwavering confidence. "The capital is currently secured inside a private Delaware entity called the Ironclad Trust. Nora managed to initiate a temporary administrative hold on the accounts using a technical loophole in the corporate bylaws. But it is just a temporary freeze. I am meeting with a federal judge this afternoon to have her officially removed as the trust director. We will have full access to the capital and the land deed by tomorrow morning." The room remained completely silent. The shareholders stared at him, their faces hard and unforgiving. They were experienced, ruthless investors. They could smell desperation like blood in the water, and Bradley was bleeding heavily. "Just give me 48 hours, Bradley pleaded, leaning over the table. "I built this company from the ground up. I personally secured the waterfront property. We are standing on the edge of the most profitable commercial real estate venture in the history of this city. Do not let a scorned, angry woman tear down everything we have built together. I just need a formal vote of confidence from this board today to stabilize the public relations disaster. Let me steer the ship through this temporary storm. By the end of the week, the contractors will be paid, the groundbreaking will proceed, and we will be back on track to make hundreds of millions of dollars." He looked around the table, desperately searching for a single nodding head or a sign of agreement. He thought he could manipulate them the exact same way he manipulated his family. He thought his natural charisma and arrogant promises would save him one last time. He genuinely believed that if he just kept lying, the terrifying reality of his total financial ruin would somehow magically disappear. Richard steepled his fingers together, looking at Bradley with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You want a formal vote of confidence?" Richard asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You want us to hand control of our investments over to a man who is currently out on bail for massive federal tax evasion?" Before Bradley could formulate another desperate lie, a sharp, confident knock echoed through the boardroom. The heavy oak doors did not just open, they swung wide, revealing the absolute last person Bradley ever expected to see inside his corporate sanctuary. I stepped through the heavy oak doors and into the center of the executive boardroom. I was not wearing an off-the-rack dress from a discount department store. I wore a sharply tailored charcoal blazer, my hair pulled back into a sleek professional knot. I carried a single slim leather briefcase. I did not come alone. Flanking me were two heavily built private security contractors I had hired that morning, their presence instantly neutralizing any physical threat Bradley might try to pose. The entire room froze. The 12 powerful shareholders stared at me in stunned silence. Bradley stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. The color that had briefly returned to his face vanished entirely, replaced by a sickly ashen gray. "What are you doing here?" Bradley demanded, his voice cracking violently. He pointed a shaking finger at me and looked frantically toward the hallway. "Security! Get this woman out of my building right now. This is a highly classified corporate meeting." I did not flinch. I did not even look at him. I walked calmly past his end of the table and took a position at the exact opposite end, facing the entire board of directors. My security detail took up positions by the doors, crossing their arms and making it perfectly clear that I was not going anywhere. "Good morning," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the thick, panicked atmosphere of the room. "My name is Nora." I apologize for the sudden interruption. However, considering my personal property is the entire foundation of this meeting, I felt it was absolutely necessary to attend in person. Richard, the older shareholder, who had been interrogating Bradley just moments before, narrowed his eyes. "Your personal property." I placed my leather briefcase onto the polished mahogany table and snapped the brass latches open. "Bradley just stood there and promised you that he was meeting with a federal judge this afternoon to have me removed as the director of the Ironclad Trust. He promised you that he would have full access to the waterfront development land by tomorrow morning. I am here to save you the trouble of waiting for a miracle that is never going to happen." I pulled out 12 thick, securely bound folders. I slid them down the length of the long table. The shareholders immediately reached for them, their greedy, calculated instincts taking over. Bradley lunged forward, slamming his hand onto the table. "Do not look at those documents," he ordered the board. "She is a thief. She manipulated those papers." Richard ignored him completely. He opened the folder and began reading. "Inside those folders, you will find the verified Delaware land deed certified by the state corporate registry as of 8 o'clock this morning," I explained, pacing slowly behind my chair. "You will also find the unredacted operational bylaws of the Ironclad Trust. As you will clearly see on page 4, the trust is legally classified as irrevocable. It cannot be altered, amended, or dissolved by a federal judge. And as the sole legal beneficiary of that trust, I am the absolute, undisputed owner of the 50 acres of the downtown waterfront project. Bradley does not own a single inch of it. He cannot build on it. He cannot borrow against it." Richard looked up from the documents. His eyes darted toward Bradley, filled with pure, venomous rage. "You lied to us," Richard hissed, his voice trembling with anger. "You stood there looking us right in the eye and lied about having collateral." "I did not lie," Bradley shouted, his facade completely crumbling. "She set me up. She drafted the paperwork to trap me. I drafted exactly what you aggressively ordered me to draft." I corrected him, my tone utterly devoid of sympathy. "You wanted a blind trust to hide your revenue from the Internal Revenue Service. You wanted a shield. You were just too arrogant to read the fine print before you signed the deed away." The woman in the gray suit closed her folder and looked at me. She was a pragmatist entirely unfazed by family drama. She only cared about the bottom line. Okay, Nora. You own the land. We recognize the legal reality of the situation. But why did you come here today? You have the asset, but we have the architectural blueprints, the construction loans, and the heavy contractors ready to break ground. Are you here to negotiate a lease agreement with our firm? I smiled. It was a cold, calculated smile. You do not have the construction loans, I reminded her gently. JP Morgan froze your $50 million credit line the moment they realized you had no collateral. Your contractors are threatening to walk off the job today. Your corporate stock is currently plummeting on the open market. And your chief executive officer is standing in front of you facing decades in federal prison. I let the brutal reality of my words hang in the air for a moment. I watched the arrogant executives fully comprehend that their entire billion-dollar vision had just evaporated. I am not here to negotiate with this firm, I stated firmly. I came here as a professional courtesy to formally notify this board that the Ironclad Trust is officially terminating all previous verbal and implied agreements with Bradley Development Company. You are completely evicted from the waterfront project. Bradley let out a strangled, furious yell. You cannot build that project without me. You do not have the infrastructure or the industry connections. That land will just sit there and rot. I finally turned to look directly at my ex-husband. The man who had humiliated me, cheated on me, and tried to destroy my professional life was now begging for scraps in his own boardroom. I do not need your infrastructure, Bradley, I said softly, delivering the final devastating blow, because I already signed a massive 99-year commercial lease agreement at 7 o'clock this morning. I already handed the land over to someone else. I told you, Nora, this is the best deal you are going to get, Bradley said, tapping his expensive gold pen against the mahogany conference table. He slid the contract toward me, a condescending smirk plastered across his face. It is a barren plot of dirt. My firm is doing you a favor by taking it off your hands. Sign the paper, take the 50,000, and let the real estate professionals handle the rest. My mother, sitting to his right with her posture perfectly rigid, nodded in agreement. Listen to your brother Nora. He knows the market. It is time you stopped playing games with your grandfather's inheritance and contributed to the family portfolio. Bradley has a major development project on the line. I looked down at the contract. $50,000 for 30 acres of prime commercial real estate that sat directly in the path of the city's new tech corridor. Bradley did not just think I was naive. He thought I was completely blind to the world outside my own front door. 50,000, I repeated, letting the number hang in the quiet of the boardroom. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands. For a property recently rezoned for mixed-use commercial development. A property that, according to the latest city planning documents, is the exact keystone needed to connect the downtown district to the new interstate off-ramp. Bradley's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered. You have been reading public zoning drafts. That is cute. But reading a draft and executing a multi-million-dollar commercial development are two entirely different things. You do not have the capital, the connections, or the experience to do anything with that dirt. I do. He is right, my father chimed in, checking his watch, as if my very presence was an inconvenience to his afternoon. We are offering you a clean exit. Take the money and go back to your little consulting business. Leave the heavy lifting to Bradley. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I reached into my leather tote and pulled out a thick bound folder. I placed it squarely on top of Bradley's insulting contract. I completely agree that executing a commercial development requires capital and connections. I said, my voice steady and deliberately calm, which is exactly why I did not try to develop it myself. I leased it. Bradley let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. You leased empty land to who? A local farmer looking to graze cattle. Not quite, I said. I signed a 99-year ground lease with full developmental rights. I watched as Bradley reached forward and flipped open the cover of my folder. His eyes scanned the first page and I saw the exact moment the blood drained from his face. His jaw slackened and the arrogant posture he had maintained all afternoon instantly collapsed. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice suddenly breathless and tight. "It is a fully executed lease agreement," I replied easily. "Signed, notarized, and filed with the county clerk at 8 o'clock this morning." My mother frowned, leaning over to look at the document. "Who did you lease it to?" Nora Bradley's firm could have matched any local offer. "They could not have matched this," Bradley interrupted, his eyes wide as he stared at the signature line. He looked up at me, his face a mask of pure panic and rising fury. "You gave the land to Sterling Vanguard." "I did not give it to them," I corrected. "I leased it to them for a highly competitive annual percentage of their gross development revenue, plus a seven-figure signing bonus." Sterling Vanguard was not just a competitor. They were the apex predator of the commercial real estate world, and more importantly, they were the exact rival firm that had been aggressively outbidding Bradley's company for the last 3 quarters. Bradley had staked his entire promotion to senior partner on securing my land to block Sterling Vanguard from entering the district. He had boasted to his board of directors that he had the property in the bag because he could easily manipulate his naive younger sister. "You cannot do this," Bradley shouted, slamming his fist onto the table. The sudden violence of the gesture made both of my parents jump. "That land is the strategic choke point for the entire valley. Sterling Vanguard is going to build their flagship tech campus right on top of our proposed access route." "Yes, they are," I said, offering a serene smile. Their lead developer, Marcus Sterling, was incredibly impressed by the location. He said it was the missing piece to their puzzle. "They are breaking ground next month." My father stared at me, his face turning an angry shade of red. "Nora, do you have any idea what you have done? You have effectively kneecapped your brother's firm. You handed his biggest rival the exact weapon they needed to destroy his project." "I did not kneecap anyone," I stated, my tone losing its warmth. "I conducted a standard business transaction. I took an undervalued asset that you all dismissed as worthless dirt, marketed it to top-tier developers, and secured a contract that guarantees my financial independence for the rest of my life." "You did this just to spite us," my mother hissed, standing up, her voice trembling with indignation. "You deliberately sought out his enemy just to ruin your brother's career. How can you be so vindictive to your own flesh and blood?" I paused and turned to face the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel small. "Spite had nothing to do with it, Mom. It was purely business. Sterling Vanguard offered fair market value. Bradley offered a fraction of a percent of what it was worth, hoping to steal my inheritance to line his own pockets. If you want to talk about how families should treat flesh and blood, you should start by looking at the son you raised." Bradley was hyperventilating, his hands tearing through the pages of the lease as if hoping to find a loophole. "I will sue you. I will tie this up in litigation for a decade. I will claim you acquired the deed under false pretenses from grandfather." "You can try," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. "But Sterling Vanguard's legal team is already prepared for that. In fact, Marcus Sterling specifically included a clause that covers all legal defense fees regarding the property's title. You will not just be suing me, Bradley. You will be taking on a $50 billion corporation." I picked up my bag and looked down at my family. The shock, the anger, the sudden realization that their scapegoat had just outplayed their golden child at his own game. "You always told me to leave the heavy lifting to the professionals, Bradley," I said, walking toward the door. "So I did. You should probably call your board of directors. I imagine they are going to be very disappointed." I let the heavy oak door of the boardroom click shut behind me. The muffled sound of my brother's frantic shouting was instantly cut off, leaving only the quiet hum of the executive hallway. I took a deep breath. The air had never tasted so sweet. I had not even made it to the elevator bank when the boardroom door violently swung open again. It was not Bradley who stormed out. It was DeAndre, the principal architect and minority partner at Bradley's firm. He had been sitting quietly in the corner during the entire meeting, a silent witness to my brother's complete humiliation. Now his usually calm, professional demeanor was replaced with a rigid, furious energy. He carried his leather briefcase tightly under his arm and marched with aggressive purpose. Bradley stumbled out into the hallway right behind him, his tie loosened and his face slick with panic. "DeAndre, wait. Where are you going? We need to call crisis management right now," Bradley pleaded, grabbing at his partner's sleeve. "We have to draft a statement for the shareholders before Sterling Vanguard puts out a press release. We can spin this." DeAndre yanked his arm away with a look of absolute disgust. He stopped right in front of the elevator doors, turning to face my brother. "There is no spinning this, Bradley," DeAndre said, his voice dangerously low and echoing down the marble corridor. "You lied to me. You lied to the board of directors. You looked our primary investors in the eye last Tuesday and guaranteed that you had the deed to that land locked down. You told us your sister was a pushover who would sign it away for pennies. You built an entire $90 million financial model on a lie." "She was supposed to sign it," Bradley yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She went behind my back. This is a minor setback. We can pivot the development route." "Pivot where?" DeAndre snapped. "Into the river." That land was the only viable access point for the commercial hub. Without it, the entire project is dead in the water. I am not going down for your arrogance. DeAndre adjusted his grip on his briefcase, his eyes burning with resentment. "I am done, Bradley. I am resigning my partnership effective immediately. I am going straight to my office to clear out my desk, and then I am calling the Tokyo investors to tell them exactly why their money is gone. I suggest you call your lawyers because the board is going to sue you for gross negligence and fiduciary breach." Bradley looked as if he had been physically struck. He staggered back against the glass wall. "You cannot do this. If you walk out now, the firm collapses. My career will be over." "Your career ended 10 minutes ago when she handed you that lease," DeAndre replied coldly. He turned toward me, his expression softening just a fraction. "Brilliant play, Nora. You played him perfectly." Before I could respond, the elevator arrived with a soft chime. DeAndre stepped inside and the doors closed, leaving Bradley staring at his own reflection in the polished metal completely destroyed. That was when my parents spilled out into the hallway. The shock of the boardroom had finally worn off, replaced by a vicious, panicked reality. My father marched straight up to Bradley, his face purple with rage. "Did I just hear DeAndre correctly?" my father demanded, his voice booming. "Did you lie to your own board of directors about securing the property?" "Dad, I can fix this," Bradley stammered, raising his hands defensively. "I just need a massive bridge loan to keep the firm afloat until I find a new project. Just a few million from the family trust." "A loan," my father roared, stepping so close that Bradley shrank back. "You just lost the biggest development deal of the decade to your fiercest rival. You lied to your investors. My personal pension fund is heavily tied up in your firm's stock. If you go down, I lose half my net worth. You have ruined us." My mother quickly stepped between them, placing a trembling hand on my father's chest. "Richard, stop it. He is your son. We have to help him. We can hire better lawyers to break Nora's lease. She is the one who did this to us. She is the one tearing this family apart." My father violently brushed her hand away and glared at her with pure contempt. "Stop coddling him, Martha," he shouted. "This is exactly why he is a failure. You spent his entire life telling him he was a genius and treating Nora like garbage. You convinced him he could just bully his sister into handing over a gold mine. Well, look at your golden boy now. He is a fraud and he just bankrupted my retirement." "How dare you blame me for this?" my mother shrieked, her perfect posture completely shattering. "You were the one who told him to offer her 50,000. You said she was too stupid to know the difference. Do not act like you are innocent in this. You encouraged his arrogance." "I am not the one facing a federal fraud investigation," my father yelled back. The polished, wealthy facade of my family was completely gone, replaced by three greedy people turning on each other the second their money was threatened. Bradley was openly weeping, sliding down the glass wall to sit on the floor, his hands clutching his hair in despair. My mother and father were screaming insults at each other, digging up decades of resentment and failed business decisions right there in the hallway. I watched them for a long moment. I did not feel sad and I did not feel angry. I just felt completely free. The heavy chains of their expectations and cruelty had finally snapped. I pressed the elevator button. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and turned around. Bradley looked up from the floor, his eyes wide and desperate. "Nora, please," he choked out. "You have to fix this." I offered him one last serene smile. "Call a professional," I said. The doors slid shut, cutting off the sound of my family tearing themselves apart, and I began my descent toward a brand new life. 6 months passed. The crisp autumn air had given way to a bright, promising spring. I stood on the private balcony of my new downtown office, a steaming cup of artisan coffee in hand, looking out over the city skyline. In the distance, massive yellow cranes stretched into the sky methodically, laying the steel framework for the Sterling Vanguard Tech campus. My bank accounts were overflowing. My consulting firm had tripled in size due to the industry respect I had quietly commanded, and I had not spoken a single word to my family since the day the elevator doors closed. Life was incredibly peaceful. I turned back toward my desk just as my cell phone began to vibrate against the mahogany wood. I glanced at the screen. The caller ID did not display a name, only a harsh automated notification from a state correctional facility. I raised an eyebrow. Curiosity got the better of me, so I tapped the screen and pressed the phone to my ear. A robotic voice informed me that I was receiving a collect call from an inmate. I pressed the number 1 to accept the charges. "Nora?" The voice on the other end was barely a whisper, hoarse and trembling. It took me a full 3 seconds to recognize it as my older brother. Bradley did not sound like the golden child anymore. He sounded completely hollowed out. "Hello, Bradley," I said, my tone as casual as if he were calling to ask about the weather. "I must say I am slightly surprised to hear from you. The business journals mentioned your firm was liquidated last month, but I did not realize your new accommodations were state-funded." "Do not do this, Nora. Please, I am begging you." Bradley sobbed into the receiver. The metallic clanging of heavy doors and the shouting of other inmates echoed loudly in the background. "I need your help. They arrested me on Tuesday. The Tokyo investors went to the federal authorities. They are charging me with wire fraud, embezzlement, and gross financial negligence. The judge set my bail at $500,000, but I only need to post 10% to get out. I need $50,000. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, dark roast. $50,000. The exact amount he had thrown in my face for a property worth millions. The poetic justice of the universe was truly staggering. "Where are Mom and Dad?" I asked calmly. "Surely the people who spent their entire lives treating you like a flawless prodigy can liquidate some assets to bring their boy home." "They have nothing left, Nora." Bradley choked out his breath, hitching in panic. "Dad's pension was wiped out when the firm collapsed. He is drowning in debt from the margin calls. Mom tried to take out a second mortgage on the house, but the bank refused because Dad's accounts are frozen by the investigators. They are getting a divorce. They will not even speak to each other, let alone to me. You are the only one who has any liquid cash. You are a multimillionaire now. 50,000 is nothing to you." "You are absolutely right," I replied smoothly. $50,000 is a rounding error to me now. I spent more than that on the interior design for my new corporate suite. "Then please," he pleaded, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine, "I cannot stay in here. You do not understand what it is like. I am your brother. We are flesh and blood. You have to help me." I leaned against the glass of my balcony window, watching the city move below me. I thought about the decades of subtle cruelties. I thought about the sneers, the dismissed achievements, the constant reinforcement that I was nothing more than an inconvenient shadow standing behind his blinding light. I thought about the sheer arrogance in his eyes when he slid that insulting contract across the table, fully expecting to rob me blind, while demanding I thank him for the privilege. "Flesh and blood," I repeated softly. That is a very convenient phrase, Bradley. You never seemed to remember our shared blood when you were humiliating me at family dinners. You never remembered it when you lied to your board of directors and tried to steal my inheritance to secure your promotion. You only remember we are family now that you are sitting in a concrete cell with absolutely nothing to your name. Nora, I am sorry, I will do anything, he wailed, the sound of true desperation breaking through the static of the prison phone line. I will sign a contract. I will pay you back with interest. With what money, Bradley? I asked, my voice dropping to a low, icy register. Your career is over. Your reputation is radioactive. You are facing federal prison time. You have nothing to offer me. And as you so graciously reminded me 6 months ago, I am not a charity. Nora, do not hang up, please. You told me to leave the heavy lifting to the professionals, Bradley. I said, a genuine sense of finality washing over me. I highly suggest you find yourself a very good professional lawyer. Goodbye. I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the red button, cutting off his frantic screaming instantly. I opened my settings, blocked the correctional facility's number, and tossed the phone onto my desk. The silence in my office was beautiful. There were no more expectations. There were no more insults, no more manipulation, and no more shadows to hide in. I walked back out onto the balcony and turned my face up toward the morning sun. A bright, unburdened smile spread across my face, stretching from ear to ear. I took a deep breath of the fresh spring air, fully ready to embrace the spectacular life I had built with my own 2 hands. As a woman who has forged her own brilliant path out of the shadows, I find a profound resonance in Nora's journey. The most vital lesson to extract from this story is that true empowerment demands the severing of toxic loyalties, even when they are tied by blood. Society frequently conditions women to be the eternal martyrs of their families, expected to absorb disrespect, sacrifice their own potential, and constantly rush to save the very people who push them down. Nora's family relied on this exact conditioning. They assumed her silence was weakness and her patience was stupidity, expecting her to hand over her inheritance for pennies, just to inflate her brother's golden child ego. However, Nora's ultimate victory was not merely in the brilliant execution of a multi-million-dollar lease. Her true triumph was her unwavering emotional detachment. She realized that her worth was never defined by her family's flawed perception of her. More importantly, she learned that she was not obligated to be the safety net for those who spent years trying to push her off the ledge. When her brother called from a federal prison cell begging for the exact sum of money he had once used to deeply insult her, she did not waver. She allowed him to face the devastating consequences of his own arrogance. This story teaches us that protecting your peace and building your own empire is the most exquisite form of justice. We do not owe our light to those who repeatedly try to bury us in the dark. Embrace your independence, trust your own intellect, and never let guilt manipulate you into shrinking your success to make others comfortable. Examine the relationships in your life that drain your energy, and find the courage to ruthlessly cut the toxic ties holding you back from claiming your ultimate worth.